Sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is ask a stranger to love them. Sometimes the hardest thing a broken man can do is say yes. In a small Wyoming town, 7-year-old Emma Mitchell watches her widowed mother work herself to exhaustion on their struggling farm, the loneliness eating away at both of them. Then a giant cowboy named Jacob Stone rides through a drifter who'd spent 15 years running from his own pain. When Emma approaches him with innocent eyes and asks him to be her father at her mother's birthday, everything changes. He could have ridden away like he always did. But something in that little girl's voice stopped him cold. What happens when a man who's forgotten how to stay meets a family that desperately needs him to? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer heat settled over Clearwater, Wyoming like a heavy blanket, turning the main street's dust to powder that coated everything it touched. It was 1882, and the town sat at the edge of the frontier where civilization met wilderness, where people came to start over or to disappear. The distinction between the two wasn't always clear. Sarah Mitchell stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun climb over the eastern ridge. Her hands moved through dishwater that had gone lukewarm, washing the same plate for the third time without realizing it. Through the wavy glass, she could see her daughter Emma feeding the chickens, her small frame moving with careful purpose among the birds. The child wore a faded blue ribbon in her hair, the same ribbon Thomas had given her on her 4th birthday, just months before the accident. 3 years. It had been 3 years since the plow horse spooked, and Thomas fell beneath the blade. 3 years of waking alone, of making every decision by herself, of carrying buckets that seemed to grow heavier with each passing season. Sarah was 31 years old, but her hands told a different story. The calluses had calluses now, and her fingers struggled to straighten fully each morning. Stiff from work that never seemed to end. The farm wasn't large by territory standards, 40 acres of workable land, a barn that leaned slightly to the north, a house that Thomas had built with his own hands. It was enough to survive on, barely, if you worked from dawn until you couldn't see anymore, if you ignored the ache in your back and the loneliness that crept in with the dark. Sarah had become very good at ignoring things. She set the clean plate on the drying rack and dried her hands on her apron. The fabric was worn thin in places, patched in others. Everything they owned had been patched or mended or made to last beyond its natural life. That was the way of things now. "Mama!" Emma's voice carried through the open window, bright with the kind of energy that only 7-year-old children possess before the world teaches them to be tired. The spotted hen laid 2 eggs today. Sarah managed a smile, the real kind that reached her eyes when Emma was involved. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Bring them in carefully." Emma appeared moments later, cradling the eggs like precious jewels. Her face was smudged with dust, her dress also patched, already showing the morning's adventures. But her eyes were clear and bright, innocent of the worries that kept Sarah awake most nights. "Can't we have them for breakfast tomorrow?" Emma asked, setting the eggs gently in the bowl on the counter. "We can," Sarah said, running a hand through her daughter's honey-colored hair. "You did good work this morning." Emma beamed at the praise, then her expression shifted to something more serious. "Mama, are you tired?" The question landed heavier than it should have. Sarah saw herself through her daughter's eyes, the shadows beneath her own eyes. The way her shoulders sagged, even when she tried to stand straight. The forced brightness in her voice that didn't quite hide the exhaustion underneath. "I'm fine, baby," Sarah said, the lie comfortable from repetition. "Just thinking about everything we need to do today." "I can help more," Emma said quickly. "I'm big enough now." "I can. You help plenty," Sarah interrupted, kneeling down to meet her daughter's eyes. "You're my best helper. You know that. But you're also supposed to be a little girl. You're supposed to play and have adventures, not worry about grown-up things." Emma's expression suggested she worried about grown-up things anyway. I've been worrying about them for longer than she should have. Children who grow up too fast have a particular look in their eyes, a knowing that sits uncomfortable on young faces. The church bell rang in the distance, marking 8 o'clock. Sarah stood, feeling her knees protest the movement. I need to go into town this morning. Mrs. Henderson is expecting those preserves I made. Can I come? Emma asked hopefully. Sarah hesitated. Taking Emma meant the trip would take longer, meant stopping to let her look at things, meant answering questions and keeping track of her in the crowded general store. But leaving her alone meant worry, meant Emma working when she should be playing, meant more loneliness for both of them. Yes, Sarah decided. Go wash your face and hands. We'll leave in 20 minutes. Emma raced off, and Sarah heard the pump working outside as her daughter attacked the day's dirt with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else. Sarah looked down at the wedding ring she wore on a chain around her neck. She'd stopped wearing it on her finger after the first year, not because she'd stopped loving Thomas, but because the weight of it had become too much. The ring caught on things when she worked, reminded her constantly of what was missing. She tucked it back beneath her dress and began gathering the jars of preserves she'd made from last year's berry harvest. Each jar represented hours of work picking, cooking, sterilizing, sealing. Each jar was a small victory against hunger and poverty, proof that she could still provide for her daughter. The ride into Clearwater took 30 minutes by wagon, down a rutted road that hadn't seen proper maintenance since the Territory Administration cut funding. Sarah kept the horses to a steady walk, mindful of the axle that had cracked last winter and been poorly mended. One more thing that needed proper fixing, one more thing that would have to wait. Emma sat beside her, swinging her legs and humming a tune Sarah vaguely recognized from church. The child had Thomas's ability to find joy in simple things, to be present in the moment rather than constantly worried about what came next. Sarah envied that quality even as she cherished it. In her daughter, Clearwater revealed itself gradually as they crested the final hill. The town was small even by frontier standards, one main street with buildings on either side, a church at one end, a saloon at the other, and the shared understanding that most of life happened in between. The general store anchored the center of town, its false front painted white despite the dust that immediately dulled it. Next to it stood the doctor's office, then the assessor's office that did double duty as the land office, then a few other establishments that served the scattered ranches and farms in the surrounding territory. People moved along the wooden sidewalks with the unhurried pace of those who'd learned that rushing in the heat just made you tired faster. Sarah recognized most of them, the Hendersons, the Weavers, old Mr. Jacobson, who ran the livery, Pastor Williams making his rounds. This was her community, such as it was. They'd helped after Thomas died, brought food and sympathy, offered prayers and practical assistance. But charity has a shelf life, and 3 years was well past it. Now they were kind but distant, supportive but not involved. Sarah understood. Everyone had their own struggles. She pulled the wagon up in front of the general store and helped Emma down. Stay close, she reminded, unnecessarily. Emma never wandered far. The store's interior was dim and cool, a welcome relief from the sun. Rows of goods lined shelves that reached the ceiling: flour, sugar, coffee, bolts of fabric, tools, rope, everything a person might need to survive on the frontier. The smell was a mixture of leather, tobacco, coffee, and sawdust. Familiar and oddly comforting. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the back room, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a round woman with kind eyes and a tendency toward gossip that was more curious than malicious. Sarah and Emma, how lovely to see you both. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah greeted, setting her basket of preserves on the counter. I brought those jars we discussed. Mrs. Henderson examined them with a practiced eye, holding them up to the light from the window. Beautiful work, as always. Your strawberry preserves sold out in less than a week last time." They negotiated a fair price, and Sarah felt the small weight of coins drop into her palm. Not much, but enough to buy the flour and salt they needed. Maybe a small peppermint stick for Emma if there was anything left over. Asterisk. While Mrs. Henderson wrapped the items Sarah purchased, Emma stood pressed against the window, watching the street with intense focus. Sarah recognized the look her daughter was thinking about something, turning it over in her mind with the seriousness she brought to important matters. "Mama," Emma said quietly, not turning from the window. "Who's that man?" Sarah joined her at the window, following her daughter's gaze. At first, she didn't see anything unusual, just the regular traffic of a weekday morning. Then she spotted him. He was leading his horse toward the livery, moving with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent more time in the saddle than on foot. There was something about him that suggested both strength and weariness, capability and caution. He was the kind of man who noticed everything while appearing to notice nothing. "I don't know him," Sarah said. "Probably just passing through." "He's so big," Emma observed, not with fear but with the frank assessment children bring to everything. "Like a giant from the stories." Sarah felt a strange flutter in her chest. Something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Then she did recognize it and felt immediately guilty. She turned from the window, gathering her purchases. "Come on, sweetheart. We should head home. There's work to do." But Emma remained at the window a moment longer, watching the tall stranger disappear into the livery stable. Something in her young mind was calculating, considering, forming plans that adults would have dismissed as childish fancy that Sarah didn't notice. She was too busy pushing down that flutter, reminding herself that she had a farm to run, a daughter to raise, and no time for foolish thoughts about blue-eyed strangers who were just passing through. She had no way of knowing that the stranger wasn't planning to pass through at all. Jacob Stone had been drifting for 5 years, and he was tired. Tired of running, tired of empty horizons, tired of waking up alone in places that meant nothing. He decided that morning, looking at Clearwater from the ridge above town, that maybe it was time to stop for a while. He had no way of knowing that a little girl with a blue ribbon in her hair was about to change his life forever. Sometimes destiny arrives quietly in the space between one ordinary moment and the next. Sometimes it comes wearing dust and determination, standing no higher than a man's belt buckle, with eyes that see right through all. The walls a person builds to keep the world at bay. Sometimes it comes in the form of a child, brave enough to ask for what she needs. Emma waited 3 days before making her move. 3 days of watching the tall man work at the livery, mucking stalls and tending horses with gentle efficiency that seemed at odds with his imposing size. 3 days of listening to the adults talk about him in fragments. Looking for work, came from Montana, keeps to himself, seems decent enough. 3 days of watching her mother grow a little more tired, a little more silent, a little more like a candle burning down to nothing. On the 4th day, Emma told her mother she was going to play at the Weaver's farm and instead walked into town alone. She wore her blue ribbon and her Sunday dress, the one with only 2 patches that didn't show too badly. She'd practiced what she would say, whispered the words to herself at night when her mother thought she was sleeping. The walk took nearly an hour, but Emma was used to walking. She was used to being tired too, though she tried not to let her mother see it. If Manna knew how much Emma worried, it would just make her worry more, and she already had too much weighing on her. Jacob Stone was outside the livery when Emma found him, brushing down a chestnut mare with long, patient strokes. He worked with the kind of quiet competence that spoke of decades of practice, his large hands surprisingly gentle. The horse stood calm under his attention, ears relaxed. A picture of trust. Emma stood at the edge of the street for a full minute, gathering her courage. This was harder than she'd imagined, now that the moment was here. The man was even bigger up close, not frightening exactly, but overwhelming. His shadow seemed to stretch halfway across the street. She thought about her mother's hands, cracked and bleeding at the knuckles. She thought about the way Mama sometimes cried at night when she thought Emma couldn't hear. She thought about her father, the memory of him growing hazier each year until sometimes Emma couldn't quite remember what his laugh sounded like. She stepped forward. "Mister?" Jacob turned, startled. His eyes, that startling blue Emma had noticed from the store window, widened slightly when he saw her. He set down the brush and removed his hat in one smooth motion, the gesture automatic and respectful. "Hello there," he said. His voice was deep but soft, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to carry weight. "You lost, little miss?" "No, sir," Emma said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I came to talk to you." Jacob glanced around, as if expecting to see an adult nearby. When he didn't, a look of concern crossed his weathered face. "Does your mama know you're here?" "She thinks I'm playing at the Weaver's farm," Emma admitted. "But I needed to talk to you without her knowing. It's important." Jacob shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. He was a man who'd spent years avoiding complications, and a 7-year-old girl showing up alone was definitely a complication. But there was something about her, the seriousness in her young face, the determination in her stance, that kept him from simply sending her away. "What's so important?" he asked carefully. Emma took a deep breath. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. "My mama's birthday is in 2 weeks," she said. "She'll be 32 years old. She doesn't want a party or presents or anything like that. She doesn't want anything for herself at all." Jacob waited, sensing there was more coming. "But she's so lonely," Emma continued, and now her voice did shake a little. "She's been lonely for 3 years, ever since my papa died. She works so hard, and she's so tired, and she never smiles the real way anymore. Just the pretend way she does for me." "I'm sorry to hear that," Jacob said, and he meant it. He knew something about loneliness, about smiles that didn't reach your eyes. "But I'm not sure what that has to do with, can you be my dad at her birthday?" Emma blurted out. "Just for one day? Just so she can feel like we're a whole family again? Just for a little while?" The question hung in the air between them, impossibly large and impossibly simple all at once. Jacob felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Of all the things he'd expected this child to say, this hadn't even made the list. "Little miss," he started, then stopped. "What's your name?" "Emma Mitchell. My mama is Sarah Mitchell. We have the farm east of town, past the old windmill." "Emma," Jacob said gently, kneeling down so he was closer to her eye level. Though even kneeling, he was still taller than her. "That's not something I can do. Your mama doesn't even know me. She wouldn't want a stranger." "You're not mean," Emma interrupted. "I've been watching you. You're gentle with the horses, and you say good morning to people, even when they don't say it first. And yesterday, you helped Mrs. Henderson carry her packages, even though she didn't ask. You're not a stranger. You're just someone we haven't met yet." Jacob felt something crack inside his chest, some wall he'd built so carefully over the past 5 years. He reached into his saddlebag, more to have something to do with his hands than anything else, and his fingers brushed against something small and wooden. He pulled it out without thinking. It was a carved horse, no bigger than his palm, worn smooth from years of being carried. He'd made it for his daughter Lily when she was 5 years old, had spent hours getting the details right, the proud arch of the neck, the flowing tail. She'd carried it everywhere for the year she'd had left, Emma's eyes fixed on the little horse with the intensity only children can muster. "That's beautiful," she whispered. Jacob looked at it, really looked at it for the first time in months. He usually kept it buried deep in the bag where he wouldn't have to see it, wouldn't have to remember. But here it was, in his hand, in the sunlight. Still perfect after all these years. "I had a daughter once," he heard himself say. "Her name was Lily, and a wife named Anna. They died 5 years ago. Fever took them both in less than a week. Emma's face crumpled with empathy. "I'm sorry," she said, and the words carried a weight that suggested she knew exactly what sorry meant, what losing someone cost. "After they died, I left Montana," Jacob continued, not sure why he was telling this child things he hadn't spoken aloud in years. "I had a ranch there, a good life. But everything reminded me of them, and it hurt too much to stay. So I've been moving ever since. Town to town, job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to—" He stopped himself. What was he doing? This was a child, asking him for something impossible, and here he was spilling his grief like water from a cracked bucket. "Long enough to what?" Emma asked softly. "Long enough to care," Jacob finished. "Long enough for it to hurt when I leave." Emma considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. Then she said, "Maybe that's why you should come to Mama's birthday. Because you know what it feels like to be lonely. Because you understand." Jacob closed his hand around the wooden horse. "Emma, even if I wanted to, and I'm not saying I do, your mama would never agree to this. She'd think it was strange, having some drifter show up to her birthday because her daughter asked him." "Then we won't tell her I asked," Emma said quickly. "We'll say you met her in town, and you offered to help fix something on the farm, and she invited you to dinner to say thank you. We'll say it was natural." "That would be lying," Jacob pointed out. "It would be storytelling," Emma countered. "There's a difference. Stories are how we make things happen that need to happen." Despite himself, despite the alarm bells ringing in his head, despite every instinct that told him to saddle his horse and ride out of Clearwater before sunset, Jacob felt his lips twitch toward a smile. This little girl was something else. "Why me?" he asked. "There must be other men in town, men your mama actually knows. Mr. Weaver is nice, but he spits tobacco and it's disgusting," Emma said practically. "Mr. Henderson is already married. Pastor Williams is too old, and he talks too much about sin. And Mr. Brennan," she made a face. "Mr. Brennan looks at Mama like she's something he wants to buy at the store, and it makes my stomach feel bad." Jacob filed that last bit away. He'd met Wade Brennan briefly, and the man had struck him as ambitious in the wrong kind of way. If Brennan had designs on Sarah Mitchell's farm or on Sarah herself, that could mean trouble. "And you think I'm better than all those options?" Jacob asked. Emma nodded firmly. "You have sad eyes but kind ones. And you made that horse for your daughter, which means you know how to love people. Mama needs someone who knows how to love people, not someone who wants to own them." The wisdom in those words, coming from someone so young, nearly undid Jacob completely. He stood up, his knees protesting, and looked down at Emma Mitchell with her blue ribbon and her patched dress and her heart, full of hope she probably couldn't afford. He should say no. Every rational part of him knew that. He should send this child home, pack his things, and move on to the next town like he'd done 100 times before. Staying meant risk. Staying meant possibility. Staying meant he might start to care again. And caring meant vulnerability to the kind of pain he'd sworn he'd never feel again. But then he thought about his Lily, who would have been about Emma's age now if she'd lived. He thought about Anna, who'd always seen through his walls, who'd loved him not despite his flaws, but because of his heart. He thought about the wooden horse in his hand, and how he'd been carrying it like a talisman against forgetting, against moving on, against living. What would Anna say if she could see him now? What would Lily think of the man he'd become, drifting, hiding, running from every connection, because connection might hurt? They'd be disappointed. They'd want him to live, not just exist. They'd want him to help this brave little girl and her tired mother, if he could. They'd want him to risk his heart, because that's what hearts were for. 2 weeks, you said? Jacob heard himself ask. Emma's face lit up like sunrise. Yes, sir. Her birthday is the 23rd of August. And you really think you can convince your mama that I just happened to show up to help with farm work and she invited me at dinner? I can be very convincing, Emma said confidently. Mama says I could talk a coyote into becoming a house dog if I set my mind to it. Jacob laughed, actually laughed, the sound surprising even himself. When was the last time he'd laughed? He couldn't remember. I must be crazy, he muttered. Then louder, all right, I'll do it. But just for the birthday, Emma. Just for one dinner. After that, I move on like I planned. Understood? Understood, Emma agreed quickly, though her eyes held a gleam that suggested she wasn't done making plans. Thank you, mister. I don't even know your name. Jacob, he said. Jacob Stone. Thank you, Mr. Stone, Emma said formally, sticking out her hand like she'd seen adults do. Jacob shook it solemnly, her small hand disappearing in his calloused palm. You better get on home before your mama starts worrying. And Emma? Think carefully about how you're gonna make this seem natural. Your mama's not going to believe just any story. I'll think of something good, Emma promised. She started to turn away, then stopped. Mr. Stone? My papa made me promise before he died that I'd take care of Mama. I was only 4, but I remember. I've been trying, but I'm not big enough yet. Maybe you could help me keep that promise, just for a little while? Jacob nodded, not trusting his voice. Emma smiled a real smile, the kind that showed hope and relief, and the peculiar joy of children who still believed that good things could happen if you just asked for them. She skipped away down the street, her ribbon bouncing, leaving Jacob standing in the dust with a wooden horse in one hand, and the feeling that he'd just agreed to something that would change his life in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. He looked down at the little horse, at the careful details he'd carved all those years ago. Then he looked up at the blue Wyoming sky, cloudless and vast. Ah, he said quietly, I hope you know what you're doing, putting that little girl in my path. Because I sure as hell don't. The sky offered no answer, but somewhere deep in his chest, Jacob felt the faintest warmth, like the first hint of sun after a long, cold winter. It felt dangerously like hope. He tucked the wooden horse back into his saddlebag, but this time he didn't bury it deep. He left it near the top, where he might see it again, where it might remind him that once upon a time, he'd been someone who carved toys for his daughter and believed in tomorrow. Maybe, just maybe, he could be that person again. At least for 2 weeks. At least for one birthday dinner. At least long enough to help a little girl keep a promise to her dying father. Emma's plan, when she finally revealed it 3 days later, was both simpler and more audacious than Jacob had expected. She'd arranged everything with the ruthless efficiency of a general planning a campaign. The barn door is broken, she told Jacob when she found him at the livery again. It has been for 6 months. Mama tries to fix it, but it just breaks again. If you show up and offer to fix it properly, she'd have to say yes because she needs it fixed. And then when you're done, it would be rude if she didn't offer you a meal. And if you're there for a meal anyway, why not stay for her birthday dinner too? Jacob had to admire the logic, even as it made him nervous. And how exactly did the door break this time? Emma had the grace to look slightly guilty. I might have accidentally on purpose knocked the support loose this morning while I was doing chores, but it was going to break again anyway, so really, I just helped it along. Emma, it's not lying, she insisted. The door really is broken now. You really can fix it. Everything else just follows naturally. So here Jacob was 2 days later, riding up the dusty road to the Mitchell farm with a bag of tools and a knot of anxiety in his stomach. The farm revealed itself gradually, a small house with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned worryingly to one side, fields that showed careful tending despite limited resources, and everywhere the signs of work done by hands that were willing but too few. Sarah Mitchell was in the yard hanging laundry when he arrived. She turned at the sound of his horse, one hand shading her eyes against the morning sun. Jacob saw the exact moment she recognized him, or rather, recognized that he was the stranger from town. Her posture shifted, became more guarded. "Can I help you?" she called, polite but wary. Jacob dismounted, removing his hat. "Ma'am, I'm Jacob Stone. I've been working at the livery in town. I happened to mention to Mr. Jacobson that I was looking for some extra work, and he said you might could use someone to look at your barn door. Said it's been giving you trouble." This was the story Emma had suggested, with Mr. Jacobson's name added for credibility. The old man had actually said no such thing, but Emma had assured Jacob that Mr. Jacobson was half-deaf and wouldn't remember one way or the other if asked. Sarah's expression remained cautious. "Mr. Jacobson said that, did he?" "Yes, ma'am. I don't mean to intrude. Just thought I'd offer. I'm good with carpentry, and I've got time before I move on." There it was, the key phrase Emma had insisted he include. Before I move on. Make it clear he wasn't staying, wasn't looking for anything permanent. That way, Mama wouldn't feel threatened or pressured. Sarah glanced at the barn, where the door hung at an angle that suggested complete failure was imminent. Jacob could see the calculation in her eyes, pride warring with necessity, suspicion fighting with the desperate need for help she couldn't afford to pay for. "I can't pay much," she said finally. "Maybe a meal and a few dollars, if the work is good." "That seems fair," Jacob agreed, though he'd already decided he wouldn't take any money. The meal would be enough, would have to be enough, because this was already more complicated than he'd intended. Sarah studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "All right then. The tools are in the barn. Door's been broken for 6 months, Jacob supplied, remembering Emma's briefing. Mr. Jacobson mentioned. "Did he now?" Sarah said, and there was something in her tone that suggested she might be less convinced by this story than Emma had hoped. But she didn't challenge it further. "Well, I appreciate the help, Mr. Stone. Jacob's fine, ma'am." "Sarah," she replied, then immediately looked like she regretted the informality. "Mrs. Mitchell, I mean." "Sarah it is," Jacob said gently, and went to assess the barn door before the awkwardness could deepen. The door was indeed broken, and not recently. The hinges had rusted through in places. The frame was warped from moisture, and someone, Sarah, he assumed, had attempted to reinforce it with pieces that didn't quite match. It was the work of someone determined but overwhelmed, doing the best they could with inadequate materials and too little time. Jacob found Thomas Mitchell's work gloves hanging on a nail just inside the barn door. They were good gloves once, leather worn soft with use, but now they were stiff with age and disuse. He reached out to touch them without thinking, then pulled his hand back. These were sacred objects, remnants of a life that had ended too soon. He had no right to disturb them. Instead, he used his own gloves and got to work. The morning passed in the comfortable rhythm of physical labor. Jacob lost himself in the work, measuring, cutting, fitting, adjusting. This he understood. This he could do. Wood and metal made sense in ways that people didn't. They followed rules, responded predictably to skill and patience. He was aware of Sarah working nearby, hanging the rest of her laundry, then moving on to other tasks. She didn't hover, didn't watch him with obvious suspicion, but he could feel her attention circling back to him periodically, assessing. He didn't blame her. A strange man had shown up at her isolated farm. Of course she'd be cautious. Emma appeared around mid-morning, supposedly to help her mother, but really Jacob suspected to monitor the situation. She caught his eye once and gave him a subtle thumbs up before her mother could see. Jacob had to suppress a smile. By noon, he'd made good progress. The old hinges were removed, the frame straightened and reinforced, new hinges ready to install. He was debating whether to ask Sarah for water when she appeared at his elbow with a cup. "You look like you could use this," she said. "Thank you," Jacob said, accepting it gratefully. The water was cold, pulled fresh from the well, and it tasted like heaven after hours in the sun. Sarah stood there a moment, looking at his work. You're good at this. Had plenty of practice. Worked ranches most of my life. You learn to fix things when you're far from town and can't afford to hire help. Where was that? Which ranches? Jacob heard the real question under the polite one. Who are you? Can I trust you? What are you doing here? Montana mostly, he said. Worked my way up from ranch hand to foreman. Had my own place for a while. He paused, decided on honesty. Lost it after my wife and daughter died. Couldn't stay there anymore. Sarah's expression softened immediately. I'm sorry. I know something about losing people. About places that hurt to stay in. Your husband, Jacob said quietly. Emma told me. I'm sorry for your loss. You've met Emma? Sarah's guard came back up slightly. In town, Jacob said quickly, following the script. She's a bright little girl. Talked my ear off about chickens and horses and whatever else came to mind. This was true enough. Emma had indeed talked his ear off. Just not about chickens and horses. Sarah's expression softened again, this time with clear affection. She does that. Gives lonely out here with just me for company. Not many children nearby for her to play with. She seems happy enough, Jacob offered. Credit to you, raising her well on your own. Sarah looked away, but not before Jacob saw the flash of something pain. Exhaustion? Relief at being acknowledged? Cross her face. I do my best. Some days that's enough. Some days it isn't. The honesty in her voice caught Jacob off guard. This wasn't polite deflection or the stoic frontier spirit of making do. This was real admission of struggle, and Jacob recognized it because he carried the same weight. Door should be done by mid-afternoon, he said, giving her an escape from the vulnerable moment. Frame needs another hour to set properly, then I'll hang it and test the swing. Sarah nodded, seeming grateful for the return to practical matters. I'm making stew for lunch. You're welcome to some, if you'd like. I'd appreciate that. Thank you. She turned to go, then paused. Jacob, why are you really here? Mr. Jacobson can barely remember what he had for breakfast. I doubt he mentioned my barn door to anyone. Jacob felt his stomach drop. So much for Emma's foolproof plan. He met Sarah's eyes, those brown eyes that had seen too much hardship, and decided that another layer of deception wasn't the way to start whatever this was. Your daughter is very persuasive, he said carefully. She found me in town and mentioned you could use help. I had the time and the skills. Seemed like a decent thing to do. Sarah's expression went through several shifts: surprise, understanding, resignation, something that might have been amusement. That sounds like Emma. She's been worried about me managing the farm alone. I keep telling her not to worry, but she loves you, Jacob said simply. Children worry when they love someone. Can't help it. No, Sarah agreed softly. They can't. She looked at him with new assessment, and Jacob had the uncomfortable feeling of being truly seen for the first time in years. Well then, thank you for being kind enough to humor a little girl's scheme. The door genuinely does need fixing, whatever story we tell about how you came to fix it. Happy to help, Jacob said, and minute. Sarah went back to the house, and Jacob returned to his work with the odd sensation that something had shifted. The deception had been revealed and diffused, turned into something almost like shared understanding. Emma's plan had failed in its details, but succeeded in its essence. He was here. He was helping. And Sarah hadn't sent him away. Lunch was simple but good stew with vegetables from the garden, bread that Sarah had baked that morning, water from the cold well. They ate at the kitchen table, Emma chattering happily about her day, while Sarah and Jacob exchanged occasional comments about the farm, the weather, the state of the door repair. It felt dangerously normal. Dangerously like family. After lunch, Jacob finished the door. He hung it properly, tested the swing, adjusted the hinges until it moved smooth and true. When he was done, it looked like it might last another 20 years instead of another 20 minutes. Sarah came out to inspect his work, Emma trailing behind her. The door swung open and closed with a satisfying smoothness, no longer dragging or catching. "That's good work," Sarah said, and the relief in her voice told Jacob how much this one small repair meant in the larger context of everything she was trying to hold together. "Thank you, truly. Let me get you those few dollars." "No need," Jacob interrupted. "The meal was payment enough. Besides, I enjoyed the work." "Jacob, I can't just—" "You can, and you will," he said firmly but kindly. "Let me do this. Let it be just one thing that's taken care of. No strings attached." Sarah looked like she might argue, but Emma jumped in before she could. "Mama, it's almost your birthday. Maybe Mr. Stone could come to birthday dinner as a thank you, since he won't take money." Jacob had to admire the girl's timing. Sarah shot her daughter a look that suggested she knew exactly what was happening, but Emma just smiled innocently. "I wouldn't want to impose," Jacob said, following the script again, even though the script had already been partially abandoned. "It wouldn't be an imposition," Sarah said. And now she was looking at him with what might have been challenge or might have been hope. "If you're still in town, you'd be welcome. It's just going to be the two of us otherwise, and Emma's right. You've done us a kindness. Least I can do is offer a proper meal." "Then I'd be honored," Jacob said. "When is it?" "August 23rd. 6 o'clock, if that suits you." "That suits me fine." They stood there for a moment, Jacob and Sarah and Emma, in the afternoon sun with the repaired barn door swinging gently in the breeze behind them. Something had been set in motion that none of them could have articulated, but all of them felt a possibility. Fragile and uncertain, but undeniably present. Jacob rode back to town as the sun started its descent, and for the first time in 5 years, he found himself looking forward to something. Not with joy exactly, not yet, but with something that wasn't quite dread either. Something that felt suspiciously like anticipation. Behind him, at the farmhouse, Emma hugged her mother tight and whispered, "See? I told you he was nice." Sarah hugged her back and didn't say what she was thinking, that nice was one thing, but trust was another. That letting someone in, even for one birthday dinner, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, but she also didn't say that Jacob's hands had been gentle on the wood, that his voice had been kind when he spoke of his lost daughter, that for a few hours today, the farm had felt a little less lonely. Some truths were too new, too tender, to speak aloud yet. The storm came 3 days before Sarah's birthday, rolling down from the mountains with the kind of fury that reminded people how small they were against the forces of nature. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and the wind picked up until it howled around the corners of buildings like something alive and angry. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching the clouds build and calculating how much time she had. The late-season hay was still in the field, not yet brought in. If the rain came hard enough, it would rot where it lay. That hay represented winter feed for the livestock, represented survival for the animals, that represented survival for her and Emma. "Mama, it looks bad," Emma said, pressed against her side. "It does," Sarah agreed, already moving toward the door. "Stay inside, baby. I need to get what I can into the barn before." Thunder cracked overhead, loud enough to shake the windows. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, the kind that promised deluge to follow. Sarah ran for the field, knowing already that she was too late, that she couldn't possibly move enough hay alone, that she was about to lose something essential. The rain intensified as she reached the first bales, soaking through her dress in seconds. Turning the ground beneath her feet to mud. She grabbed the first bale, hefted it with strength born of desperation, and started hauling it toward the barn. Her arms screamed in protest. The bale seemed to gain weight with each step, soaked through and impossibly heavy. She made it to the barn, dropped it, ran back for another. The rain was a wall now, visibility reduced to almost nothing. Sarah grabbed another bale, pulled, felt something in her back wrench painfully. She gasped but didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This was survival. She was reaching for the third bale when she saw him. Jacob appeared through the rain like a ghost, already soaked to the skin, leading his horse at a run. He took one look at the situation and immediately started loading bales onto his horse's back. "What are you doing here?" Sarah shouted over the thunder. "Helping," he shouted back. "Don't argue, just work." So they worked. Sarah and Jacob hauling bales, working in frantic tandem, racing against the storm. The rain pounded down, the wind tore at them, the mud sucked at their boots with each step. Emma appeared at the barn door despite orders to stay inside, helping stack the bales they brought in, her small face set with determination. An hour passed. Maybe two. Time became meaningless, measured only in bales saved or lost. Sarah's hands were raw and bleeding. Her back shrieked with every movement. Her lungs burned from exertion and cold rain. But she kept moving because Jacob kept moving, because stopping meant defeat, because this was what frontier life demanded. Everything you had, and then somehow more. Finally, Jacob grabbed her arm. "Enough," he shouted. "We've saved most of it. The rest isn't worth your life." Sarah wanted to argue, but she was shaking with exhaustion and cold, could barely stand. She let him guide her to the barn, let him close the door against the storm, let herself collapse against a hay bale while her body finally admitted how close she'd pushed it to breaking. Emma rushed to her, wrapping her arms around her mother. "You're freezing, Mama." "I'm all right," Sarah managed, though her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form words. Jacob was already moving, efficient despite his own exhaustion. He stripped off his soaked coat, found an old blanket in the corner, wrapped it around Sarah's shoulders. "You need to get to the house. Get warm and dry. Emma, can you help your mama while I tend to my horse?" "Yes, sir," Emma said seriously. "I can manage," Sarah protested weakly. "You can barely walk," Jacob said bluntly. "Let your daughter help you. Let me finish here. We'll talk once you're not at risk of catching your death." Sarah wanted to argue more, but another violent shiver overtook her. Emma tugged at her hand, and Sarah let herself be led to the house like a child, too tired to maintain her pride. Inside, Emma helped her mother change into dry clothes with a competence that broke Sarah's heart. Her 7-year-old daughter shouldn't have to be this capable, this accustomed to crisis. Sarah managed to get a fire going in the stove, managed to put water on for tea, managed to collapse into a chair before her legs gave out entirely. 20 minutes later, Jacob knocked at the door. Emma let him in, and Sarah saw that he'd found dry clothes somewhere, an old shirt that looked like it might have been Thomas's, kept in the barn for emergencies. It was too small for him, tight across the shoulders, but at least it was dry. "Your horse?" Sarah asked. "Rubbed down and comfortable in the barn. I hope you don't mind. I found some oats." "Feed him whatever he needs," Sarah interrupted. "He earned it tonight." "You both did." She paused, then forced herself to ask the question. "Why did you come? How did you even know?" Jacob settled into a chair, accepting the cup of tea Emma offered him. "I saw the storm building. Thought about your hay still in the field. Figured you might try to save it alone and end up hurt." He met her eyes. "I've done stupid brave things trying to save what matters. Thought you could use someone to be stupid brave with you." Sarah felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that wasn't the tea or the fire. Stupid brave. That's one way to put it. "Better than stupid alone," Jacob said quietly. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the storm rage outside. Emma climbed into her mother's lap, small and warm, and Sarah held her close. "We saved most of it," Jacob said finally. 70, maybe 80%. Enough to get through winter, if you're careful. Because of you, Sarah said. I couldn't have done it alone. Would have lost it all. You would have tried, though, Jacob observed. Would have worked yourself to collapse trying. I don't have a choice. It's just me. I have to try. It doesn't have to be just you, Jacob said, and something in his voice made Sarah look up sharply. Jacob, I know, he said quickly. I know I'm just passing through. I know you don't need or want some stranger inserting himself into your life. But Sarah, you can't do everything alone. Eventually something gives. Eventually you break. I'm not broken, Sarah said, but her voice shook. Not yet, Jacob agreed gently. But you're close. I can see it. I recognize it because I've been there. Emma looked between them, her young face serious. Mr. Stone, are you going to stay after Mama's birthday? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Jacob looked at Emma, then at Sarah, then down at his hands wrapped around the warm cup. I don't know, he said honestly. I wasn't planning to, but you might? Emma pressed, hope naked in her voice. Emma, that's enough, Sarah said gently. Mr. Stone has his own life, his own plans. We can't ask him to. I'm not asking him to stay forever. Emma interrupted, which was unusual enough that Sarah let her continue. Just asking if he might think about it. That's not a bad thing to ask, is it? From the mouths of children, Sarah thought. Such simple wisdom, such uncomplicated hope. Why was it so hard for adults to just ask for what they needed? No, Sarah said quietly. It's not a bad thing to ask. Jacob stood up, moved to the window, looked out at the rain that was finally starting to ease. I've been running for 5 years, he said, not turning around. Every time I start to feel settled, every time I start to care about a place or people, I get scared and I leave. It's easier that way. Safer. Lonelier, though, Emma observed. Jacob laughed, a sound without much humor. Yes, lonelier. He turned back to face them. I told myself I'd stay in Clearwater until the first snow. That gives me maybe 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, depending on the weather. I could. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I could help around the farm during that time. If you'd let me. No expectations beyond that. Sarah's mind raced through implications and possibilities. Having help, even temporary help, would make an enormous difference. But it would also mean getting used to having him around, would mean Emma getting more attached, would mean opening herself up to the pain of him leaving when the snow came. I can pay you a little, she said, testing the waters. Not much, but fair wages for work done. Don't want wages, Jacob said. Just room and board. I can sleep in the barn. The barn's not fit for her, it's fine. It's fine, Jacob interrupted. I've slept in worse places. And this way, if something happens at night, sick animal, predator, whatever, I'm right there. He was making it easy for her to say yes. Making it practical, transactional. Nothing to do with the way her heart had lifted when he appeared through the storm. Nothing to do with the warmth spreading through her now that had nothing to do with dry clothes and tea. All right, Sarah heard herself say. Until the first snow. Help with the farm, take meals with us, sleep in the barn. When winter comes, you're free to go with no hard feelings. No hard feelings, Jacob agreed. Emma squealed with delight and threw her arms around Jacob's waist. He stiffened for just a moment. Then his hand came down gently on her head. And Sarah saw something in his face, pain and pleasure mixed together. The look of a man remembering what it felt like to have a child hug him. Thank you. Mr. Stone, Emma said, muffled against his shirt. Jacob, he said quietly. If I'm going to be around for a while, you should call me Jacob. Thank you, Jacob, Emma corrected, looking up at him with pure adoration. The storm passed during the night, leaving the world washed clean and temporarily green. Jacob made good on his word, moving his few possessions to the barn and setting up a modest space in the loft, where the hay was dry and the roof didn't leak. It wasn't much, but he'd lived in worse. The next days fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. Jacob rose with the sun and worked until dark, tackling the 100 small repairs and improvements that Sarah had been putting off because she simply didn't have the time or strength. He fixed the porch steps, reinforced fence posts, cleared the irrigation ditch, tended to livestock with gentle competence. Sarah worked alongside him when she could, and slowly they learned each other's rhythms. Jacob was quiet but not cold, competent but not arrogant. He asked before changing anything, respected her knowledge of her own land, never made her feel less capable just because he was stronger. And Emma bloomed like a flower finally getting enough sun. She followed Jacob around when Sarah let her, asking endless questions, helping with small tasks, chattering away about everything and nothing. Jacob listened with patient attention, answered her questions seriously, and occasionally showed her how to do things, how to properly stack hay, how to tell if a horse was favoring a leg, how to braid a rope so it wouldn't come loose. One afternoon, Jacob found Emma in the meadow beyond the barn, picking wildflowers with intense focus. He watched her for a moment, remembering Lily doing the same thing, feeling the familiar ache but finding it somehow less sharp than before. "What are you picking those for?" he asked, joining her. "They're pretty," Emma said simply, "and Mama needs pretty things. Everything here is just work and dirt and things that need fixing. She needs something just for beauty." Jacob helped her pick flowers, his large hands gentle with the delicate stems. When they had a decent bouquet, Emma pulled out her small Bible, a gift from her late father, and carefully pressed one of the flowers between the pages. "Why that one?" Jacob asked. "So I'll remember this day," Emma said. "The day we picked flowers together. The day you were here." Something in Jacob's chest clenched. "Emma, you know I'm only staying until—" "I know," she interrupted. "Until the first snow. You told us. But that doesn't mean I can't want to remember. Papa taught me that. He said even if something ends, the memory of it stays forever if you take care of it right." Jacob knelt down beside her, looked at this small girl with her old soul and her pressed flower and her determined hope. "Your papa sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Emma agreed. "And he'd like you, I think. He'd be glad you're helping us." "I hope so," Jacob said quietly. They brought the flowers back to the house, and Sarah's face when she saw them was worth every moment of the picking. She put them in a jar on the kitchen table, and for the rest of that week, every time Jacob came in for a meal, he saw her glance at them and smile, but not everything was peaceful. 2 days after the storm, Wade Brennan showed up. He rode up to the farm in the late afternoon, dressed too well for a working ranch visit, his horse too clean for a man who did his own labor. Jacob was in the barn when he arrived, but he heard the voices and came out to find Brennan talking to Sarah in the yard. "Just being neighborly, Sarah," Brennan was saying, his voice smooth as oil. "I heard you had some trouble with the storm. Wanted to make sure you were managing all right." "We managed fine," Sarah said, her voice polite but cool. "Thank you for your concern." Brennan's eyes found Jacob, and something calculating flickered across his face. "I see you've hired some help." Smart thinking. "Farm this size is too much for a woman alone." The casual condescension in his tone made Jacob's jaw tighten, but Sarah handled it with practiced grace. "Jacob's been very helpful," she said evenly. "We're grateful for the assistance." "I'm sure you are," Brennan said, and there was something in his smile that Jacob didn't like. "Though I have to wonder how long you can afford to keep hired help. Times being what they are." "That's my concern, Mr. Brennan," Sarah said, and there was steel in her voice now. "Was there something specific you needed, or were you just passing by?" Brennan's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Just being neighborly, like I said. But since you mention it, my offer still stands." If you ever decide this place is too much to manage, I'd be happy to take it off your hands. Fair price, no pressure. The farm isn't for sale, Sarah said firmly. It won't be for sale. This is Emma's inheritance, Mr. Brennan. It's her connection to her father. I'd sooner die than sell it. Strong words, Brennan observed. But pride's a luxury, Sarah. Sometimes practical considerations have to come first. He tipped his hat. Think about it. The offer won't last forever. He rode off, leaving Sarah standing rigid with suppressed anger. Jacob approached carefully. That happen often? He asked. Often enough, Sarah said tightly. He's been circling ever since Thomas died. Thinks I'll eventually give up, accept that I can't do this alone, and sell to him for whatever he decides is fair, which would be far less than it's worth. I'm guessing. Less than half, Sarah confirmed. He's not interested in helping me. He's interested in my water rights and my land position. If he owned this property, he'd control access to the northern grazing range. Jacob looked out at the farm, the modest house, the lean barn, the fields that showed careful tending despite Sarah's exhaustion. He thought about Thomas's gloves hanging unused in the barn, about Emma pressing flowers, about Sarah's raw hands and determined eyes. He's not getting it, Jacob said quietly. Not while I'm here. Sarah looked at him sharply. Jacob, you can't. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, Jacob agreed. But I'm here until the first snow. And while I'm here, I'm not going to stand by and watch some vulture pick at what you've built, what Thomas built, what Emma deserves to inherit. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. You don't understand what you're saying. Brennan's not just ambitious. He's ruthless. If he thinks you're in his way, I've dealt with ruthless men before, Jacob said. I'm not easily intimidated. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, Jacob interrupted gently. I'm offering. There's a difference. They stood there in the fading light, Sarah and Jacob, and something shifted between them again. Not love, not yet, but something that might grow into it given time and trust partnership. Maybe. The understanding that some battles are easier fought together than alone. Until the first snow, Sarah said finally. Accepting. Until the first snow, Jacob agreed. Inside the house, Emma watched through the window, her pressed flower carefully placed in her Bible, and smiled. She'd asked for a father for one birthday dinner. But maybe, just maybe, she was getting something more, something that might last beyond the first snow after all. Sarah's 32nd birthday arrived on a perfect August evening. The kind where the heat of the day gives way to a coolness that reminds you autumn is coming. The sky painted itself in shades of orange and pink, and the breeze carried the smell of sage from the hills. Sarah had tried to downplay the occasion, as she did every year, but Emma and Jacob had conspired against her. When Sarah came in from the afternoon chores, she found the kitchen transformed. Wildflowers in every jar and cup they owned. The good tablecloth, the one Thomas's mother had given them, spread across the table. Candles lit against the gathering dusk. Emma stood by the table in her Sunday dress, practically vibrating with excitement. Jacob stood near the stove, looking uncomfortable but determined, wearing what was probably his only clean shirt. Surprise! Emma shouted, throwing her arms wide. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. You two, when did you? This afternoon while you were in the far field, Emma said proudly. Jacob helped me with everything. And look, she pointed to the stove. He made supper. Well, Emma helped, Jacob said quickly. And it's nothing fancy. Just roast chicken and vegetables. Biscuits. I hope it's perfect, Sarah said, and her voice caught on the words. You didn't have to do all this. We wanted to, Emma said firmly. You're always doing things for everyone else. Tonight we do things for you. Jacob pulled out a chair. Sit. Let us serve you for once. Sarah sat, overwhelmed, and trying not to cry. She watched Jacob and Emma move around her kitchen with easy coordination, serving food, pouring water, fussing over details with obvious care. When had they become a team? When had this started feeling so natural? The meal was simple but delicious. The chicken seasoned perfectly. The vegetables roasted until they were sweet and caramelized. Jacob had even made gravy, rich and brown, the kind that took patience and attention. Where did you learn to cook like this? Sarah asked, savoring a bite. Anna taught me, Jacob said, and Sarah heard the way his voice softened around his late wife's name. She said any grown man should be able to feed himself properly. She was patient with me, even when I burned more than I cooked at first. Asterisk. She sounds like she was wonderful, Sarah said gently. She was, Jacob agreed. Lily, our daughter, she had Anna's kindness and her stubbornness. Once she decided something should be a certain way, there was no convincing her otherwise. Like Emma, Sarah observed, smiling at her daughter. Very much like Emma, Jacob agreed. And the look he gave Emma was so tender it made Sarah's heart ache. After dinner, Jacob disappeared briefly and returned with 2 packages wrapped in brown paper. He handed the smaller one to Emma. For helping me tonight. Emma tore into it with the enthusiasm only children possess, then gasped. Inside was a small carved bird, wings spread as if in flight, every feather detailed and perfect. You made this? Emma breathed, turning it over in her hands. Carved it in the evenings, Jacob said. Thought you might like it. I love it, Emma declared, hugging him fiercely. Thank you, Jacob. Then Jacob handed the larger package to Sarah. For your birthday. Sarah unwrapped it carefully, preserving the paper for a later use. Inside was a music box, old but beautifully restored. The wood gleamed with fresh polish. The mechanism gleamed where Jacob had cleaned and oiled it. Asterisk. It was broken when I found it in town, Jacob explained. At the general store in the back room. Mrs. Henderson was going to throw it away. I asked if I could have it, worked on it until it played again. Sarah opened the lid, and a delicate melody filled the kitchen. A waltz, sweet and melancholy. She recognized it immediately. This is Thomas and I danced to this song. At our wedding. Emma told me, Jacob said quietly. Thought you might like to have it. Sarah looked up at him with tears spilling over now, unable to hold them back. How did you know? How did you know this was exactly what I needed? I didn't, Jacob admitted. I wanted you to have something that wasn't practical. Something that was just for you, just for beauty. Like the flowers Emma picked. Some part of your life that isn't just work and surviving. Sarah stood up, moved around the table, and without thinking too hard about it, hugged Jacob. He stiffened for just a second. Then his arms came around her carefully, like he was holding something precious and breakable. Thank you, Sarah whispered, for all of this, for being so kind to Emma, for helping us, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'm sorry. I'm not usually this emotional. It's your birthday, Jacob said gently. You're allowed to feel things on your birthday. Emma, watching this exchange with obvious satisfaction, declared it was time for cake. She'd made it herself, or mostly herself, with some supervision from Jacob, and it was slightly lopsided but covered in honey, glaze, and love. They ate cake and talked as the candles burned down. Emma told stories about her father, and Sarah found that for once it didn't hurt quite so much to remember. Jacob shared more about Anna and Lily, stories full of love and everyday moments that meant everything. After Emma finally went to bed, Sarah and Jacob found themselves on the porch, watching the stars emerge. The night was cool enough to need a shawl, and Sarah wrapped herself in one that had been Thomas's, still faintly carrying his scent of tobacco and soap. This was a good day, Sarah said quietly. The best birthday I've had since Thomas died. Thank you for making that possible. Emma did most of it, Jacob deflected. I just followed her orders. You did more than that, Sarah insisted. The music box, Jacob, that was. She struggled to find words. It was thoughtful in a way I didn't expect. Most people would have given me something practical, something for the farm. But you gave me something for my heart. Jacob was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkness beyond the porch light. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. The tin photograph of Anna and Lily. He handed it to Sarah. In the dim light, she could barely make out the two faces, a woman with kind eyes and a smile. A little girl with curls and her mother's nose. They were beautiful, Sarah said softly. They were everything, Jacob corrected. When they died, I thought I died too. The part of me that could feel things, could hope for things, could build things. I left Montana because everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts. Every room in that house, every corner of that ranch, it all reminded me of what I'd lost. So you started moving, Sarah said, understanding. Trying to outrun the grief. Trying to outrun everything, Jacob agreed. Love, connection, caring about anything or anyone. Because caring meant risk, and I couldn't. He paused, gathering courage. I couldn't face losing anyone else. Couldn't survive it again. Sarah handed the photograph back carefully. And now? Now I'm terrified, Jacob admitted. Because somewhere between fixing your barn door and saving your hay and watching Emma press flowers, I started caring again. Started hoping again. Started imagining what it might be like to stay instead of run. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. Jacob, I know, he said quickly. I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Thomas. I know you have every reason to protect yourself and Emma from some drifter who might disappear when things get hard. I'm not asking for anything, Sarah. I'm telling you the truth. Because you deserve honesty. Sarah looked at this man, this giant, gentle, broken man who'd appeared in her life through her daughter's innocent scheme and stayed through his own choice. She thought about Thomas, about the love they'd shared, about the promise she'd made at his grave, to honor his memory by living well. Would Thomas want her to be alone forever? Would he want Emma to grow up without a father figure? Or would he want them to heal, to open their hearts to new possibilities while still keeping him in their memories? I'm scared too, Sarah said finally. Scared of trusting again. Scared of being hurt. Scared of needing someone and having them leave. She took a breath, but I'm also tired of being scared. Tired of just surviving instead of living. Emma deserves more than that. I deserve more than that. You do, Jacob agreed quietly. I don't know what this is, Sarah continued. Between us. I don't know if it's just gratitude or loneliness or something more, but I'd like time to find out. Real time, not just until the first snow. Jacob turned to look at her fully, and even in the dim light, Sarah could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. What are you saying? I'm saying stay, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Not just until winter. Stay and work the farm with me. Stay and help me raise Emma. Stay and let's see what grows between us, if we give it a chance. Sarah, I don't have much to offer. Some skills, strong hands, a willingness to work. But I don't have money saved, don't have property anymore. All I have is yourself, Sarah finished. That's what you have. And maybe that's enough. Maybe we figure out the rest together. Jacob reached out slowly, giving Sarah time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his calloused hand covered hers where it rested on the porch railing. I can't promise I won't be scared sometimes, he said. Can't promise the grief won't catch up with me on hard days. Can't promise I'll always know the right thing to do. I can't promise those things either, Sarah said. But maybe we can be scared together. Maybe we can figure it out together. Maybe. She turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. Maybe that's what family is. Not perfection. Just people choosing to stay even when it's hard. They sat there, hands joined, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside, Emma slept peacefully, her carved bird on the table beside her bed, her pressed flowers safely tucked in her Bible. Tomorrow there would be work to do, challenges to face, Wade Brennan's schemes to worry about. Tomorrow there would be the regular struggles of frontier life and the complicated process of learning to trust again. But tonight, for the first time in 5 years for Jacob and 3 years for Sarah, the future felt like something more than just an obligation to survive. It felt like possibility, like hope, like the beginning of something worth building. "Stay until spring at least," Sarah said. "See what a full cycle of seasons looks like here. See if this place feels like home. And if it does," Jacob asked quietly. "Then we talk about making it permanent," Sarah said. "About partnership. About," she hesitated, then pushed forward. "About building a life together, the three of us." Jacob squeezed her hand gently. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." They stayed on the porch until the candles inside burned down, talking in low voices about practical things and impossible dreams, about past sorrows and future possibilities. And somewhere in those hours, without either of them quite noticing when it happened, the space between them became less about two broken people seeking comfort and more about two healing people choosing hope. Emma had asked for a father for one birthday dinner. But what she'd actually given her mother, given all three of them, was something far more precious. Permission to love again. Permission to believe that loss didn't have to be the end of the story. That new chapters could be written without erasing what came before. The music box sat on the kitchen table, its melody silent now, but its presence a reminder that beauty and memory could coexist, that honoring the past and embracing the future weren't mutually exclusive. And in the barn, hanging on their nail, Thomas's work gloves waited quietly. Not forgotten, not replaced, but joined now by Jacob's gloves hanging beside them, a symbol of continuity and change, of what was and what might yet be. September arrived with cooler mornings and the subtle shift in light that marked summer's retreat. The farm took on a different rhythm: harvest preparation, preserving what they'd grown, getting ready for winter. Jacob threw himself into the work with renewed purpose, no longer helping as a temporary hand, but investing as someone who might be here to see the spring planting. The Mitchell farm deed sat on the kitchen table one morning, coffee stained from years of difficult conversations held over that worn document. Sarah had pulled it out to check the property boundaries, making sure she understood exactly what she owned before Wade Brennan could claim otherwise. Jacob found her staring at it, her finger tracing the boundary lines Thomas had walked with such pride 7 years ago. "Everything all right?" he asked, setting down his own coffee. "Just thinking," Sarah said. Thomas spent years saving for this land, worked himself nearly to death proving up the claim, building the house, making it productive. This deed represents everything he dreamed of for Emma, for our family. "It's a good piece of land," Jacob observed. "Water access, decent soil, protected from the worst weather. I can see why Brennan wants it." "He's not getting it," Sarah said fiercely. "I don't care what he tries. This is Emma's inheritance, her connection to her father. No amount of pressure or manipulation is going to make me give that up." Jacob heard the determination, but also the undercurrent of worry. "Has he been back?" "Not directly, but Pastor Williams mentioned that Brennan's been asking around about our finances, about whether we're managing, about how long I can afford to keep help on." She looked up at Jacob. "He's trying to build a case that I'm failing. That selling would be the responsible choice." "You're not failing," Jacob said firmly. "The farm's in better shape now than it was a month ago, and it'll be in even better shape come spring. Because of you," Sarah pointed out. "What happens if—" She stopped herself, but Jacob heard the unspoken question. "What happens if you leave?" "I'm not planning to leave," Jacob said quietly. Not unless you ask me to. Sarah met his eyes, searching for certainty she knew she might not find. Trust was built slowly, earned through actions, not words. But she wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that this time, someone would choose to stay. The question of Jacob's permanence wasn't the only thing shifting in their small household. Emma had been the bridge that brought them together, but now she seemed to be struggling with the reality of what she'd created. Sarah noticed it first during dinner. One evening, Emma pushing food around her plate, unusually quiet, stealing glances at Jacob with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. You feeling all right, sweetheart? Sarah asked. Fine, Emma said, too quickly. That night, Sarah heard Emma crying. She went to her daughter's room, sat on the edge of the small bed, and gathered Emma into her arms. What's wrong, baby? Emma hiccuped against her mother's shoulder. I had a bad dream. About what? About Jacob leaving, Emma whispered. About him getting on his horse and riding away and never coming back. And you were sad again, like you were after Papa died. And it was my fault because I asked him to come, and then he left and broke your heart. Sarah's own heart clenched. She'd been so focused on her own fears, her own careful attempts to open up to Jacob, that she hadn't considered how this was affecting Emma. Her daughter had engineered this whole situation, but she was still a child who'd already lost one father and was terrified of losing another. Emma, listen to me, Sarah said, pulling back to look at her daughter's tear-stained face. Jacob staying or leaving isn't your responsibility. You asked him to help us, and he did. Anything beyond that is between me and him as grown-ups. If he leaves, it won't be your fault. And if he stays, it won't be because he feels obligated. It'll be because he chooses to. But I want him to stay so much, Emma sobbed. I want him to be my papa. Real papa, not just pretend. Is that bad? Is it wrong to want that when I still miss my real papa? Sarah felt tears burning her own eyes. Oh, sweetheart, no. It's not bad or wrong. Your Papa Thomas, he would want you to be happy. He'd want you to have someone to teach you things and protect you and love you. Having Jacob in your life doesn't mean you love your papa any less. Love doesn't work like that. It doesn't run out or get used up. You can love both of them. Do you love Jacob? Emma asked with the directness of childhood. Sarah paused, considering. I think I'm starting to. It's different from how I loved your papa. But that's okay. Different doesn't mean less. It just means different. And if he leaves, then we'll be sad for a while, Sarah said honestly. But we'll be okay. We've survived before. We'll survive again. And Emma, you need to understand something. Jacob is here because he wants to be, not because you asked him once. He's choosing this every day. That's important. Emma nodded, scrubbing at her eyes. Can I still call him Jacob? Or should I ask if I can call him Papa? You should ask him what he'd like, Sarah suggested, when you're ready. But Emma, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that he might need more time. He lost his daughter. Stepping into that role again might be hard for him. They talked longer, until Emma's tears dried and her breathing evened out. Sarah stayed until her daughter fell asleep, then went downstairs to find Jacob sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. She all right? He asked when Sarah appeared. Bad dream, Sarah said, sitting across from him. About you leaving. Jacob winced. I heard her crying. Wasn't sure if I should, if it was my place to. It's complicated, Sarah agreed. Jacob, Emma's getting attached to you. More than I realized. And that's wonderful. But it's also scary for her. She's already lost one father. The thought of losing another is terrifying. I'm not going anywhere, Jacob said, but there was uncertainty in his voice that matched the uncertainty Sarah felt. You can't promise that, Sarah said gently. None of us can promise that. Life happens. People die or leave or change their minds. But what we can promise is to be honest about our intentions, to be clear about what we're building here." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. "Then, I need to tell you something. About Montana. About what I left behind." Sarah waited, sensing this was important. "I didn't just leave a ranch," Jacob said slowly. "I abandoned a successful operation. I had a partner, a good man named Daniel. We'd built that place together over 10 years. When Anna and Lily died, I walked away. Signed my half over to Daniel for nothing. Took my horse and my saddle and left. Didn't even wait to see if he could manage alone. Did he?" Sarah asked. "Manage? I don't know," Jacob admitted. "Never wrote, never checked. Just ran. That's what I do, Sarah. When things get hard, when I'm scared, when I start to feel too much, I run. I've been running for 5 years. And now? Now I'm tired of running," Jacob said. "But that doesn't mean the urge isn't there. Doesn't mean I won't wake up some morning and panic and want to saddle my horse and disappear. I'm trying to be honest with you. I'm not sure I know how to stay anymore." Sarah reached across the table, took his hand. "Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. But Jacob, Emma needs to know you're trying. She needs to know that if you're struggling, you'll talk to us instead of just vanishing. Can you promise that much?" "I can try," Jacob said. "And Sarah, about Emma calling me Papa. She wants to ask you about that," Sarah interrupted. "When she's ready. You don't have to decide now. Just be honest with her when she does ask. Whether you're comfortable with it or not, be honest." Jacob nodded, looking down at their joined hands. "I loved being a father. It was the best thing I ever was. But taking on that role again, with Emma, it's terrifying. What if I fail her? What if I leave and break her heart? What if you stay and make her happy?" Sarah countered. "What if you give her the father she needs and yourself the daughter you lost? What if instead of all the terrible things that might happen, we focus on all the good things that could?" It was a radical idea, choosing hope over fear, possibility over protection. But sitting there in the quiet kitchen, hands clasped across a table marked by years of difficult decisions, it felt like the only choice that made sense. Wade Brennan made his next move 3 days later. Arriving at the farm with an official-looking surveyor and a territorial land office representative, Jacob and Sarah were working together to repair the chicken coop when they saw the riders approaching. "Stay calm," Jacob murmured. "Don't let him rattle you." Brennan dismounted with practiced ease, his smile too wide, too confident. "Sarah, Jacob, hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "We're working, Mr. Brennan," Sarah said evenly. "As usual. What can I do for you?" "Just conducting some routine business," Brennan said, gesturing to his companions. "Mr. Carlson here from the land office is helping me survey my water rights, making sure everything's properly documented." "Your water rights?" Sarah's voice sharpened. "The water on this property belongs to this property, Mr. Brennan. That's been established since Thomas filed the original claim." "Well, that's the interesting thing," Brennan said, pulling out a document. "Turns out there might have been some errors in the original survey. The main water source might actually originate on land outside your boundaries, which would make it subject to different regulations." Jacob felt anger rising but kept his voice level. "That's a lie, and you know it. The spring's been part of this property since before the Mitchells bought it. Now, I'm sure it's just an honest mistake," Brennan said, his tone patronizing. "These old surveys, they're not always accurate. That's why we're doing a proper resurvey, making sure everything's legal and correct." "Convenient timing," Sarah observed coldly. "Right before winter, when I'd be least able to fight a legal challenge." Brennan shrugged, the picture of false innocence. "I'm just protecting my interests, same as anyone would. If the water's properly mine, then we need to establish usage rights. I'm not unreasonable, I'd be willing to sell you water access at a fair rate. At whatever rate you decide, Jacob said, which would conveniently make it impossible for Sarah to maintain the farm, forcing her to sell to you. Now that's a cynical view, Brennan said, but his eyes glittered with satisfaction. I'm just following the law. If you have concerns about the survey, you're welcome to hire your own surveyor to contest the findings. Though I imagine that's not in your budget right now. He was right, and he knew it. A legal surveyor would cost money Sarah didn't have, and the territorial land office bureaucracy could drag things out for months. Even if she ultimately won, the uncertainty and expense could cripple the farm. I'll fight this, Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly but determined. I have the original deed. I have documentation. I'll take this to every authority I need to. Of course, Brennan said smoothly. That's your right. Just wanted to give you fair warning about what's coming. Professional courtesy between neighbors. He tipped his hat. Enjoy the rest of your day. He rode off with his surveyor and land office representative, leaving Sarah and Jacob standing in the yard, anger and worry warring for dominance. He's going to try to take everything, Sarah said once they were out of earshot. He's going to use the law to steal what Thomas built. Not if we can help it, Jacob said firmly. Sarah, I know you don't have money for a surveyor, but I have some savings. Not much, but enough to. I can't take your money, Sarah protested. You've already done so much. If I'm staying, if this is going to be my home too, then protecting it is protecting us, Jacob interrupted. Let me help. Let me be a partner in this, not just hired help. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the determination in his face, the commitment in his stance. He meant it. He wasn't just being noble or temporary. He was choosing to plant roots, to fight for this place, to make it his. All right, she said quietly. But we do this together. Partners in every sense. Partners, Jacob agreed, and sealed it with a handshake that felt like a promise. That evening, they sat with Emma and explained what was happening in terms she could understand. The farm might be challenged, but they were going to fight for it. Mr. Brennan was trying to take what wasn't his, but they weren't going to let him. Emma listened with the seriousness she brought to important matters, then asked, Can I help? You can help by being brave, Sarah said, and by trusting that we're going to take care of this. I trust you, Emma said simply. Both of you. She looked at Jacob. Jacob, can I ask you something? Of course. If we have to fight for a long time, will you still be here? Even if it's hard? Jacob knelt down to Emma's level, looked her straight in the eye. I'll be here, I promise. No matter how hard it gets, I'm not leaving. Not you, not your mama, not this farm. You promise? Emma pressed. Really, truly promise? Really, truly promise, Jacob said solemnly. Emma threw her arms around his neck, and this time Jacob didn't hesitate even for a second. He hugged her back, and Sarah saw his eyes close, saw the emotion move across his face, pain and healing mixed together. The wounds of losing Lily beginning to close even as new bonds formed with Emma. Can I call you Papa? Emma whispered against his shoulder. Jacob's breath caught. Sarah started to intervene, to give him an out if he needed it, but he spoke before she could. I'd be honored, he said, his voice rough with emotion. If you're sure that's what you want. Emma pulled back, beaming. I'm sure. I'll still remember my first Papa. My mama says I can love both of you. But you're here now, and you're staying. So you should be Papa too. Then that's what I am, Jacob said, and something in him settled into place. Some piece of himself he thought lost forever clicking back where it belonged. Sarah watched this moment, her daughter and this man who'd arrived as a stranger and become family, and felt her own walls crumbling. She'd been so careful, so guarded, protecting herself and Emma from more loss. But maybe protection wasn't the same as living. Maybe opening yourself to love again. even knowing it might end in pain, was the only way to truly honor those you'd lost. That night, after Emma was asleep clutching her carved bird, Sarah and Jacob sat on the porch in the cooling air. The stars were impossibly bright, the way they only get when you're far from any town lights. "You didn't have to promise her you'd stay," Sarah said quietly. "That's a big commitment." "I meant it," Jacob said. "Every word." "I'm done running, Sarah. Whatever comes, Brennan's schemes, hard winters, crop failures, whatever, I'm here. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you and Emma and this farm. I'm choosing a life instead of just an existence." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, some final resistance giving way. "I'm scared," she admitted, "not just of Brennan, but of this. Of us. Of letting myself feel again." "Me too," Jacob said. "Terrified. But I think being scared together is better than being safe alone." Sarah reached for his hand, and they sat in comfortable silence, fingers intertwined. Tomorrow they'd start fighting for the farm in earnest, would begin the process of legal challenges and documentation and proving what they knew to be true. Tomorrow they'd face Wade Brennan's machinations and the uncertainty of frontier justice. But tonight, they were a family. Not by blood or law, but by choice. 3 people who'd lost everything learning to build something new from the ruins. Inside, the deeds sat on the kitchen table, coffee-stained and worn, a testament to Thomas Mitchell's dreams. But it wasn't just his legacy anymore. It was Emma's inheritance, Sarah's home, and now Jacob's future too. It was worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth building a life around. Together the first stars of autumn wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but beautiful in their permanence. And on the porch of a small farmhouse in Wyoming, 3 hearts that had been broken in different ways began, slowly and carefully, to heal. Emma recovered from her fever 3 days after it started, but the scare had shaken all of them. Sarah had barely slept those 3 nights, keeping vigil by her daughter's bedside, applying cool cloths, forcing sips of water, and battling the terror that comes from watching your child burn with illness while feeling helpless to do more. Jacob had been there through all of it, fetching water, making broth Emma couldn't keep down, sitting with Sarah during the darkest hours when the fever spiked and Emma's small body shook with chills. He'd been steady and calm and present, everything Sarah needed him to be. Now, with Emma finally resting peacefully and the worst clearly past, Sarah found herself in the kitchen making tea with hands that still trembled slightly from exhaustion and lingering fear. Jacob joined her, looking as tired as she felt. "She's gonna be fine," he said quietly, reading her thoughts. Color's back in her cheeks. Fever's broken clean. "I know," Sarah said, "but I keep thinking, what if it hadn't? What if she'd gotten worse? What if—" She stopped, unable to voice the worst of her fears. Jacob pulled her into a hug, and Sarah let herself lean against him, let herself draw strength from his solid presence. They stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together, grateful for the crisis averted. The knock at the door startled them both. It was barely past dawn, too early for social calls. Jacob went to answer it while Sarah composed herself, wiping at her eyes and straightening her dress. Sheriff Daniels stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Behind him was a young man Sarah didn't recognize, dressed in traveling clothes and carrying an official-looking leather case. "Morning, Sarah Jacob," the sheriff said. "Sorry to disturb you so early. This here is Mr. Eugene Hartwell. He's come from Helena with some news for Jacob. Thought I should bring him out personally, given the circumstances." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Jacob's face had gone carefully blank, the look of a man preparing for a blow. "What kind of news?" Jacob asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his shoulders. Hartwell stepped forward, pulling documents from his case. "Mr. Stone, I've been trying to locate you for the past 3 months." I represent the estate of Daniel Morrison of Helena, Montana. Jacob's breath caught. Daniel's dead? I'm afraid so, sir. He passed in June of a heart ailment. He left behind no immediate family, and his will names you as his sole heir. As his former partner and closest friend, he left everything to you, including the ranch you both built together. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Jacob had told her he'd abandoned the ranch in Montana, but she'd assumed it was lost, sold, gone. She hadn't realized the ranch is valued at approximately $42,000. Hartwell continued, consulting his papers. That includes the land, buildings, livestock, and equipment. Additionally, there's about $8,000 in the territorial bank from the sale of last year's cattle. Mr. Morrison kept the operation, running successfully until his health failed. He was quite explicit in his will that everything should go to you. Mr. Stone said you'd earned it 10 times over. Jacob stood frozen, and Sarah saw a dozen emotions cross his face: grief, guilt, shock, confusion. Finally, he said, Daniel died 3 months ago, and you're just now finding me? You've been difficult to track, sir, Hartwell said diplomatically. You left no forwarding information when you departed Montana. I've been following your trail across 3 territories. Sarah's mind was racing, trying to process what this meant. Jacob wasn't just a drifter with some skills and a willingness to work. He was the owner of a substantial ranch in Montana. He had property money, a whole life waiting for him there. Asterisk, a life that had nothing to do with her or Emma or this struggling farm in Wyoming. I need you to return to Montana to settle the estate, Hartwell continued. Sign the necessary papers, take possession of the property, decide what you want to do with it. The ranch can't sit unmanaged indefinitely. There are decisions that need to be made, business that needs attention. How long would that take? Jacob asked, his voice hollow. Depends on what you decide to do with the property. If you're selling, we can have everything wrapped up in a few weeks. If you're keeping it and taking over operations, Hartwell shrugged. That's a longer conversation. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. I'll leave you folks to discuss this private-like. Mr. Hartwell, you can stay at the boarding house in town. I'm sure Jacob will need some time to think things through. After they left, Sarah and Jacob stood in the kitchen, the space between them suddenly feeling vast despite their physical proximity. You own a ranch, Sarah said, and hated how her voice shook. A successful ranch worth $50,000. I walked away from it, Jacob said. It didn't matter anymore after Anna and Lily died. But it matters now, Sarah said, seeing the truth of it even as she spoke. Jacob, that ranch, it's your partner's legacy. Your legacy. You built it together. And he left it to you because he believed in you, because he wanted you to have it. I don't want it, Jacob said fiercely. I want to be here, with you and Emma. That was my old life, my old self. This is who I am now. Is it? Sarah asked, and the question held all her fears, all her doubts. Or are you just running again? Running from Montana, from your past, from Daniel's death and what it represents. Jacob recoiled as if she'd struck him. That's not fair. Maybe not, Sarah agreed. But Jacob, you can't just pretend $50,000 and a successful ranch don't exist. You have to go back. You have to settle things. You have to face what you left behind. And if I do? If I go back to Montana? Jacob's voice rose with frustration and fear. What then? You think I'm not coming back? You think I'm going to get there and forget about you and Emma and everything we've been building here? I don't know, Sarah said honestly, and felt tears burning. I don't know, Jacob. A month ago, you were planning to drift through town and leave before winter. Then you were staying until the first snow. Then you were staying until spring. Now you're promising forever. But how do I know? She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. How do you know I won't run again? Jacob finished flatly. How do you know I'm not just playing at this, that I won't get scared and disappear? You disappeared from Montana, Sarah said. Left your partner without a word, abandoned everything you built. What's to stop you from doing it again? The words were harsh, and Sarah regretted them the moment they left her mouth. But they were also true, and the truth between them had always been important, even when it hurt. Jacob's face went through several expressions before settling on a kind of resigned pain. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right to be afraid. I have a history of running. I ran from Montana, ran from my grief, ran from anything that felt permanent. And now I have to go back, have to face all of it. And you have every reason to wonder if I'll come back here when I'm done. Jacob, no, let me finish, he said. You asked me once what happens when I get scared, when the urge to run hits me. I told you I'd try to stay, try to talk instead of disappearing. But Sarah, I'm terrified right now. Terrified of going back to Montana and seeing everything I abandoned. Terrified of what you're thinking right now. Terrified that I'm going to lose this, lose you and Emma and the life we're building because of decisions I made 5 years ago. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together against the fear threatening to tear her apart. When do you have to leave? As soon as possible, according to Hartwell. The ranch needs management. Decisions need to be made. I should probably go within the week. A week. 7 days to prepare for Jacob to ride out of their lives, heading back to a successful ranch and a whole life he'd left behind. 7 days to wonder if he'd ever come back. Emma's voice came from the doorway, small and frightened. Papa's leaving? They both turned to find her standing there in her nightgown, still pale from her illness, eyes wide with fear and betrayal. Emma, you should be in bed, Sarah started, but Emma cut her off. Papa's leaving, she repeated, and it wasn't a question anymore. You promised. You said you'd stay. You promised. Jacob crossed to her quickly, kneeling down. Emma, listen to me. You lied, Emma said, and tears spilled down her cheeks. You said you wouldn't leave. You said really, truly promise. But you're leaving just like everyone leaves. I'm coming back, Jacob said desperately. I have to go to Montana for a little while, but I'm coming back. I promise. You already promised, Emma shouted, her voice breaking. And you're breaking it. You're leaving, and you're not coming back, and Mama's going to be sad again. And it's going to be my fault, because I asked you to come here, and I believed you when you said you'd stay. She turned and ran, footsteps pounding up the stairs, door slamming. Sarah and Jacob stood frozen, the sound of Emma's sobs carrying through the house like accusation. I have to go to her, Sarah said. Sarah, please, I need you to believe. I don't know what I believe right now, Sarah said, exhausted and heartsick. I need to take care of my daughter. We'll talk later. She left Jacob standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the ruins of the morning and the telegram that had changed everything. Jacob spent the rest of the day in the barn, ostensibly working, but mostly just moving things around aimlessly, trying to process what had happened. Daniel was dead. The ranch he'd abandoned was his now, along with all the responsibility and guilt that came with it. And Sarah and Emma thought he was leaving them, thought this was just another in his long history of running away. Were they wrong? He'd promised he was done running, but here he was, about to ride away to Montana. The fact that he had good reasons didn't make it feel any less like abandonment. Didn't make Emma's tears any less cutting or Sarah's doubt any less justified. He pulled out the wooden horse from his saddlebag, the one he'd carved for Lily. For 5 years he'd carried it as a reminder of what he'd lost, a talisman against forgetting. But maybe it had also been an anchor, keeping him tied to grief, preventing him from truly moving forward. Daniel had understood that. Daniel had been the one to suggest, gently, that maybe Jacob needed to let himself live again. Anna wouldn't want this, Daniel had said the day Jacob announced he was leaving. She'd want you to heal, to find joy again, not to spend the rest of your life punishing yourself for surviving. Jacob had ignored him, had walked away, and Daniel had let him go. Had kept the ranch running, had protected Jacob's investment, even when Jacob didn't care about it anymore. Had left him everything in death, because he'd understood that someday Jacob might want to live again. "I'm sorry, Daniel," Jacob whispered to the empty barn. "I'm sorry I left. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry it took losing you to make me see what I was throwing away." But Daniel wasn't the only person he needed to consider. Sarah and Emma had lost too, had risked too, had opened their hearts to him despite every reason to protect themselves. And now he was asking them to trust that he'd come back, to believe in him despite his history. That evening, Jacob knocked on Emma's door. Sarah let him in with a look that said she wasn't sure this was a good idea but wouldn't stop him. Emma lay in bed, facing the wall, clutching her carved bird. She didn't turn when Jacob entered. "Emma," he said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I need to talk to you." "Don't want to talk," Emma said, her voice muffled. "I know, but I need you to hear some things anyway." "Can you do that for me? Just listen?" Emma didn't respond, but she didn't tell him to leave either. "When my daughter Lily died," Jacob began, "I thought my life was over. I thought the only way to survive was to stop feeling anything at all. So I left Montana. I left my friend Daniel who needed me. I left the ranch we built together. I left everything that reminded me of Lily and Anna because remembering hurt too much." He paused, gathering courage for what came next. "I've been running ever since. Not from places, really. From feeling, from caring. From the possibility that I might love someone again and lose them again. And Emma, that's not brave. That's not strong. That's just being scared." Emma shifted slightly, listening despite herself. "Then I met you," Jacob continued. "And your mama. And you asked me to be your papa for one dinner, and somehow that turned into me staying. Into me caring again. Into me loving again. And yes, that scares me. It scares me so much because I know what it feels like to lose people you love. But Emma, I also know what it feels like to love them, and that's worth the fear." "But you're still leaving," Emma said, finally turning to look at him with red, swollen eyes. "I have to go to Montana," Jacob said. "My friend Daniel died, and he left me his ranch, our ranch, the one we built together. I have to go back and settle his affairs. I own that. He was there for me when Anna and Lily died, and I abandoned him. The least I can do is honor his memory by doing this right." "And then you'll stay there," Emma said flatly. "Because it's a big ranch and you're important there and you're just everything." Jacob interrupted, his voice breaking. "You and your mama are everything to me now. But Emma, I can't build a life here on a foundation of running away from Montana. I have to go back. I have to face what I left behind, settle things properly, say goodbye to Daniel, and then I can come back here with a clear conscience. I can come back knowing I'm choosing this life, not just hiding from my old one." Emma studied his face with the intensity only children can muster, looking for lies, for weakness, for any sign that he didn't mean what he was saying. "How long?" she asked finally. "I don't know exactly," Jacob admitted. "A month, maybe 6 weeks. I have to get there, settle the legal matters, decide what to do with the ranch, probably sell it, which takes time. But Emma, I will come back. I give you my word, my true word, not the scared word I gave before. I will come back. What if you get there and you remember how much you loved it?" Emma asked, voicing the fear that Jacob knew Sarah shared. "What if you remember your old life and decide it's better than us?" Jacob reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden horse. He placed it gently in Emma's hand alongside the bird he'd carved for her. "I carved this for Lily," he said. "For 5 years, I've carried it with me everywhere, afraid to let it go because it was all I had left of her. But Emma, keeping it didn't bring her back. It didn't make me happy. It just kept me frozen in grief." He closed Emma's fingers around both carvings, the horse and the bird. "I want you to keep this," he said. "Both of them. The horse that represents my past, and the bird that represents my future. Keep them safe for me while I'm gone. And when I come back, because I am coming back, you can give them both back to me. And I'll put them on a shelf together in the house we're going to build. The life we're going to make. The past and the future, side by side." Emma looked down at the 2 carvings, then back up at Jacob. "You really promise? Really, truly, actually promise?" "Really, truly, actually promise," Jacob said solemnly. "I'm coming back to you and your mama. I'm coming back to this farm. I'm coming back to be your papa, if you'll still have me. Montana is where I was. Wyoming is where I'm meant to be." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and Jacob held her tight. This little girl who'd saved him without even knowing she needed saving too. "I'll keep them safe," Emma whispered. "I'll keep them until you come back." "Thank you," Jacob whispered back, later. After Emma finally fell into exhausted sleep, Jacob found Sarah on the porch. She'd wrapped herself in a shawl against the cooling night, and she didn't look up when he joined her. "She believes you," Sarah said quietly. "Or wants to believe you, anyway. And you?" Jacob asked. Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "I want to believe you too. I want to trust that you'll come back, that this isn't just another stop in your drifting, that Montana won't reclaim you. But Jacob, I've been abandoned before. Not by Thomas, he didn't choose to leave, but by hope, by possibility, by the future I thought I'd have. And I built walls after that. Good, strong walls. You've been breaking them down bit by bit. And now you're leaving, and I don't know if I can." Her voice broke. Jacob ached to reach for her, but held back, sensing she needed space. "What can I do? What can I say to make you believe I'll come back?" "Nothing," Sarah said, and the word landed like a stone. "There's nothing you can say. Words are easy, Jacob. Coming back, that's hard. That's the only thing that will prove anything." "Then I'll come back," Jacob said firmly. "I'll settle things in Montana, and I'll come back. And Sarah, I want you to know I'm selling the ranch. I'm converting everything to money, and when I come back, I want to invest it here, in this farm, in our future. I want to be your partner in every way that matters." Sarah finally looked at him, her eyes swimming with tears. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "I've never been more certain of anything," Jacob said. "I love you, Sarah. I love Emma. I love this life we're building. Montana is my past. You're my future." The words hung between them, the first time he'd said it out loud. Sarah's breath caught, and for a moment, Jacob thought she might say it back. But instead, she stood up. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't say it back. Not until I know you're really coming back. Not until I know this is real." It hurt, but Jacob understood. Trust couldn't be demanded, only earned. And he'd have to earn it by doing the hardest thing he'd done in years, leaving the people he loved with the intention of coming back, rather than running away with no intention of looking back. "I leave in 3 days," he said. "I'll help you find temporary help for the farm. I'll make sure you're set up to manage while I'm gone." And Sarah, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring. Not a wedding ring, but a simple silver band that had belonged to his grandmother. "I want you to hold on to this. Not as a promise of marriage, not yet, but as a promise that I'm coming back. When I return, you can give it back to me if you've decided you don't want this. Or you can keep it, and we'll figure out what comes next together." Sarah stared at the ring, then slowly took it. She didn't put it on, just closed her fist around it, holding it tight. 3 days, she said. And then you're on your own, Jacob Stone. You come back or you don't. But I'm not waiting forever. I can't. I won't ask you to, Jacob said. 6 weeks, Sarah. Give me 6 weeks to settle my past and come back to my future. He left her there on the porch, holding his grandmother's ring and his heart, both equally precious, both equally at risk. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and painful goodbyes that weren't quite goodbyes because they were all pretending he was definitely coming back. Jacob arranged for Tom Weaver's son to help Sarah with the heavier farm work. He fixed everything that needed fixing, prepared everything that could be prepared, tried to make the farm as self-sufficient as possible for the weeks he'd be gone. Wade Brennan's water rights challenge loomed over everything, but Jacob's savings, the money he'd been planning to use for a surveyor, now had to go toward his travel expenses to Montana. It was another thing left uncertain, another problem Sarah would have to face alone. On the morning he left, Emma gave him a long hug and whispered, "Remember, you promised." "I remember," he said. "Take care of your mama for me." "I will," Emma said seriously. "And you take care of yourself. Come back safe." Sarah walked him to where his horse was saddled and ready. The distance between them felt enormous, despite only being a few feet. "Sarah," he started. "Don't," she said, her voice tight. "Don't make this harder than it already is. Just go. Do what you need to do. Come back if you're going to come back." Jacob wanted to kiss her, wanted to hold her, wanted to promise one more time that this wasn't goodbye. But he could see she was barely holding herself together, that any more words would shatter her composure. So he just nodded, mounted his horse, and rode away from the only place that had felt like home in 5 years. Behind him, Sarah stood in the yard with Emma at her side, watching him disappear into the distance. In her pocket, the silver ring felt like both a promise and an accusation. "He'll come back," Emma said, trying to convince herself as much as her mother. "Maybe," Sarah said quietly. "Or maybe we just learned that some people, no matter how much you want them to stay, are meant to leave." The dust settled on the empty road, and the farm felt instantly larger and lonelier without Jacob's presence. Sarah turned back to the work that never ended, the responsibilities that never lessened, the fear that she'd been right to build those walls after all, because sometimes hope was just another word for heartbreak waiting to happen. Emma wrote the letter 3 days after Jacob left. She wrote it in her careful 7-year-old script, with spelling that was more phonetic than accurate, pouring her heart onto the paper because she needed him to know, needed him to understand what he meant to them. "Dear Papa Jacob, Mama is sad again. She pretends she's not, but I know. She works too hard and doesn't smile the real way. She looks at the road like she's wanting for you, and then she stops looking and her face gets hard. I miss you. I look at the horse and bird you gave me every night. I keep them safe like you asked. But Papa Jacob, I need you to come back. Not just for me. Mama needs you to." She won't say it, but she thought Mr. Bran came by again. He wasn't nice. He told Mama she should just sell now before she loses everything anyway. Mama told him to leave, but he laughed. "I don't like him. I wish you were here. Please come home soon. We love you." Emma, she folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the small cloth bag Jacob kept in his saddlebag, the one she'd seen him use for important things. She did it the morning he left, when he was saying goodbye to her mother and not paying attention. She wanted him to find it later, when he was far away and might be forgetting them, might be remembering his old life and thinking maybe it was better. She wanted him to remember that they were waiting, that they needed him, that love wasn't just words. It was coming back when you said you would dot in Montana. Jacob arrived at the ranch in late September, when the aspens on the mountainsides were turning gold and the air carried the promise of coming winter. The sight of it hit him like a physical blow. The sprawling house he and Daniel had built together, the barns and outbuildings, the corrals with good horses, the thousands of acres of prime grazing land rolling away toward the mountains. This was what he'd walked away from. This was what Daniel had preserved for him despite his abandonment. The guilt threatened to choke him. The ranch foreman, a weathered man named Tom Grady who'd worked with them from the beginning, met him at the gate with a face that held both welcome and judgment. "Jacob Stone," Grady said. "Been a long time." "Too long," Jacob agreed quietly. "I heard about Daniel." "Heart gave out last June," Grady said. "Told him he was working too hard, especially after you left, and he was trying to do everything himself. But you know how he was, stubborn as the day's long." The accusation in those words wasn't hidden. Jacob bore it because he deserved it. "I'm sorry, Tom. I should have been here. Should never have left." Grady studied him a long moment. Then some of the hardness left his face. "Daniel didn't think so. Said you needed to go, needed to heal. Made me promise to keep the place running until you came to your senses and came home." "This isn't home anymore," Jacob said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Not really. I need to settle things, sell the ranch, and get back to Wyoming. I have people there who—" He stopped, emotion catching in his throat. "People who need me. Woman?" Grady asked shrewdly. "Woman and her daughter," Jacob confirmed. "They gave me a reason to live again. I won't abandon them the way I abandoned Daniel." Grady nodded slowly. "Then let's get you settled so you can take care of business and get back to them." Daniel left instructions. "Everything's in order, just needs your signature and decisions made." The next weeks were a blur of legal paperwork. Meetings with lawyers and potential buyers, inventory assessments, and the painful process of dismantling what he and Daniel had spent a decade building. Jacob worked efficiently, driven by the need to get back to Sarah and Emma, but each decision felt weighted with significance. He visited Daniel's grave on a hillside overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple. Daniel Morrison, 1835 to 1885, friend and partner. Jacob stood there for a long time, wrestling with guilt and gratitude. "I'm sorry," he said finally, speaking to the wind and the grass and the memory of his friend. "I'm sorry I left you. Sorry I wasn't here when you needed me. Sorry it took losing you to make me see what I was throwing away, not just the ranch, but the chance to live again." He told Daniel about Sarah and Emma, about the farm in Wyoming, about finding purpose again in helping a widow and her daughter survive. He told him about being scared, but choosing to stay anyway, about promising to come back even though every instinct said to run. "You'd like them," Jacob said. "Sarah's strong like Anna was. Emma's got Lily's brightness. They're not replacements nobody could be. But they're real, and they're mine if I don't mess this up. So I'm selling the ranch, Daniel. Converting everything to money so I can invest in a future instead of hiding from the past. I hope you understand. I hope you'd approve." The wind rustled through the grass, and Jacob chose to believe it was approval. 3 weeks into his Montana stay, Jacob found Emma's letter. He'd been going through his saddlebag looking for some papers when his hand brushed against the small cloth bag. He pulled it out, confused he didn't remember putting anything in there, and found the letter. He read it 3 times, Emma's careful writing and creative spelling making his vision blur with tears. "Mama needs you to. She won't say it, but she'd deuce." The simple truth of a child, cutting through all the complexity and fear to the heart of things. He wrote back immediately, his own letter messy with emotion and urgency. "Dear Emma, I found your letter. Thank you for hiding it where I'd find it. Thank you for reminding me what's important. Tell your mama I'm coming back. I mean it. Everything here is being sold, and as soon as the papers are signed, I'm riding for Wyoming. 4 weeks at most, maybe less if I can manage it. Keep the horse and bird safe. I'll be there to collect them soon. I love you, Emma. I love your mama. I'm coming home. Papa Jacob, he posted the letter that same day and pushed the buyers harder, accepted slightly lower offers to speed things along, worked 16-hour days to process everything faster. The ranch that had once been his whole life became just an obstacle between him and where he needed to be. Back in Wyoming, Sarah was fighting her own battles. Wade Brennan had made good on his threat, filing formal challenges to her water rights with the Territorial Land Office. Without money for a proper surveyor, without Jacob's promised financial help, Sarah was facing an uphill legal battle she couldn't afford. The hearing was set for late October. Tom Weaver's son helped with the heavy labor, but he was young and inexperienced. Things that Jacob would have handled easily became struggles. The farm that had been improving under Jacob's care started to slip again, not catastrophically, but enough that Sarah could see it happening, could feel control sliding through her fingers. Worse was the loneliness. She'd gotten used to having another adult to talk to share decisions with, to stand beside during hard moments. She'd gotten used to Jacob's steady presence, his competent hands, his quiet strength. His absence was a constant ache. She pulled out his grandmother's ring sometimes, turning it over in her fingers, wondering if she'd been a fool to let herself hope. 4 weeks had passed since he'd left. His 6-week promise was running out, and there'd been no word, no letter, nothing to suggest he was coming back. "Maybe he forgot us," Sarah whispered to the empty kitchen one night after Emma was asleep. Maybe Montana reminded him of who he really was, and we were just a nice story he told himself while he was running. Emma's letter from Jacob arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by the mail coach from Helena. Emma tore it open with shaking hands, read it twice, then ran to find her mother in the barn. "He's coming back," she shouted, waving the letter. "Mama, look! Papa Jacob is coming back. He says 4 weeks at most." Sarah took the letter with hands that trembled, read Jacob's words, his promise, his declaration of love. She wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that this time would be different, that he meant what he said. But 4 weeks had become 5, and the hearing with Brennan was in 2 days. And Sarah had learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. "We'll see," she said carefully, not wanting to crush Emma's hope, but unable to fully share it. "We'll see if he makes it back in time." The night before the hearing, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with the farm deeds spread before her, coffee-stained and worn. She'd been over the property boundaries 100 times, had gathered every piece of documentation she could find, had prepared her testimony as best she knew how. But without a professional surveyor, without legal representation, without Jacob's promised support, she knew her chances were slim. If she lost the water rights, she'd lose the farm. It was that simple. Without reliable water access, the land was worthless. She'd have no choice but to sell to Brennan for whatever pittance he offered. Emma's inheritance would be gone. Thomas's dream would be dead, and she'd be alone again. Starting over with nothing but a 7-year-old daughter and the bitter knowledge that she'd been right not to trust, right not to hope, right to keep her walls up because everyone left eventually. She pulled Jacob's ring from her pocket, looked at it in the lamplight. Such a simple thing, silver worn smooth with age. He'd given it to her as a promise, and she'd held on to it like a lifeline. But promises were just words, and words meant nothing if you didn't follow through. "Come back," she whispered to the empty room, to the night, to the man who might already have forgotten them. "Please, Jacob, if you ever meant anything you said, come back. We need you. I need you." The ring glinted in the lamplight, offering no answers, no guarantees. Sarah closed her fist around it and tried to prepare herself for tomorrow, for facing Brennan's legal maneuvering alone, for losing everything, for explaining to Emma that sometimes, even when people promise, even when they mean it in the moment, they still don't come back. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first real cold of autumn. Winter was coming, earlier than expected. The roads would be harder to travel soon. If Jacob was coming, he'd need to come now. If he was coming at all. In Montana, Jacob signed the final papers transferring the ranch to its new owners. $50,000 deposited in his name at the Territorial Bank in Helena. A fortune. His future. His and Sarah's and Emma's. He rode out immediately, pushing his horse hard, racing against weather and time and his own fear that he'd waited too long, that Sarah had given up on him, that the 6 weeks he'd promised had stretched too far and broken something irreparable. He found Emma's original letter again during a cold camp the third night of travel. Reread it by firelight. Mama needs you to. She won't say it, but she'd deuce. Such simple wisdom, such clear truth. He was 4 days from Clearwater, maybe less if he pushed harder. 4 days to get back before Sarah lost faith completely. 4 days to prove that this time he wasn't running. He was running toward something. Toward home. Toward family. Toward the life he'd promised to build. The wind howled around his small fire, and Jacob Stone rode into the darkness, racing against time and doubt, and the very real possibility that he'd gambled everything and lost. The Territorial Land Office hearing room in Clearwater was smaller than Sarah had imagined. Just a cramped space above the assayer's office with benches for observers and a single table, where Judge Harrison would preside. The judge was a circuit rider, only in town twice a month. And today's hearing was the only chance Sarah would get to defend her water rights. She sat alone at the front table, her hands folded over Thomas's pocket watch, the one thing of his she brought, needing something of him with her for courage. The watch had stopped working years ago, frozen at 2:47, the time Thomas had always claimed was the luckiest time of day for no reason Sarah ever understood. She'd kept it anyway, this broken thing that marked a moment he'd thought important. Wade Brennan sat across from her with his lawyer, a slick man from Cheyenne named Aldrich, who'd probably cost more than Sarah made in a year. Brennan looked confident, almost bored, like this was already decided and they were just going through the motions. Behind Sarah, the benches held a few townspeople, Pastor Williams, the Hendersons, Tom Weaver and his son, supporters, but none who could actually help her case. Emma sat in the front row, her face pale and serious, the wooden horse and bird clutched in her hands like talismans. Judge Harrison entered, a weathered man in his 60s with sharp eyes that suggested he'd seen every trick in the book and wouldn't tolerate nonsense. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. At least he looked fair. The Territorial Land Office versus Mitchell, Harrison announced, settling into his chair. Mr. Brennan has challenged Mrs. Mitchell's water rights on the basis of incorrect boundary surveys. Mr. Aldrich, present your case. Aldrich stood smoothly, papers in hand. Your Honor, my client has conducted a professional survey of the water sources in this territory. Our findings indicate that the spring providing water to the Mitchell property actually originates on land outside Mrs. Mitchell's deed boundaries. According to territorial law, this makes the water subject to allocation rights rather than exclusive property ownership. He spread maps across the table, pointing to lines and markers that looked official and complicated. Sarah's stomach sank. She'd known this was coming, but seeing it laid out so professionally, so authoritatively, made it feel insurmountable. Furthermore, Aldrich continued, Mr. Brennan filed for water allocation rights 6 months ago, predating any claim Mrs. Mitchell might make. As the primary landholder in this territory with existing cattle operations, he has priority access. We're not asking Mrs. Mitchell to surrender her rights entirely, merely to acknowledge Mr. Brennan's primary claim and purchase water access at fair market rates. Fair market rates you determine, Sarah said quietly, unable to stay silent. Harrison's eyes flicked to her. You'll have your chance to respond, Mrs. Mitchell. Aldrich smiled thinly. The rates would be reasonable, I assure you. However, I must point out that Mrs. Mitchell has been operating this farm alone since her husband's death 3 years ago. She's made admirable efforts, but the reality is that she lacks the resources to properly maintain the property. My client's offer to purchase the farm outright would actually benefit Mrs. Mitchell. She'd receive fair compensation and be freed from an impossible situation. I'm not selling, Sarah said, her voice stronger now despite the trembling in her hands. Mrs. Mitchell, Aldrich said with false sympathy, being stubborn won't change the facts. You can't afford proper legal representation. You can't afford a competing survey. And you can't afford to operate this farm without reliable water access. The most reasonable solution is for you to stop trying to steal my land. Sarah interrupted, standing up. Her chair scraped loudly against the wooden floor. Judge Harrison held up a hand. Mrs. Mitchell, present your defense. Sarah's mind went blank for a moment. She had papers, the original deed, Thomas's survey notes, documentation of the spring's location, but they looked amateurish compared to Aldrich's professional presentation. She had truth on her side, but truth didn't always win against money and manipulation. She spread her papers across the table with shaking hands. Your Honor, this is the original deed to my property, filed and approved 7 years ago. My late husband Thomas Mitchell walked every boundary personally. The spring in question has been part of this property since before we owned it, since the original homestead claim in 1871. But Mrs. Mitchell, Aldrich interjected smoothly. As our survey shows, your survey is fraudulent, Sarah said, her voice rising. The boundary markers have been moved. I know because I've walked this property myself dozens of times. I know where the spring is, where it's always been, and it's well within my property lines. That's a serious accusation, Harrison said, his expression sharpening with interest. Do you have proof the markers were moved? Sarah faltered. She didn't have proof, just certainty born of familiarity. I know my land, Your Honor. I've lived there for 7 years. Respectfully, Your Honor, Aldrich interrupted. Mrs. Mitchell's certainty isn't evidence. Our survey was conducted by a licensed territorial surveyor using proper equipment. Unless Mrs. Mitchell can provide a competing professional survey proving our findings incorrect, I'm afraid her objections are simply emotional resistance to accepting reality. Sarah felt the case slipping away from her. Felt Brennan's satisfied smile like a knife between her ribs. Emma was crying quietly in the front row, and Sarah wanted to go to her, wanted to tell her it would be all right, but she couldn't lie to her daughter. Your Honor, she said desperately, please. This farm is my daughter's inheritance. It's her connection to her father. Thomas died proving up this land, building our home, making it productive. I've worked every day since his death to honor his memory and preserve what he built. If you rule against me, if you let Mr. Brennan take our water, you're not just taking property. You're taking everything my daughter has left of her father. Harrison's expression softened slightly, but he shook his head. Mrs. Mitchell, I sympathize. But sympathy doesn't trump law. Unless you have evidence that Mr. Brennan's survey is fraudulent, unless you can provide documentation supporting your claims, I have no choice but to... The door burst open. Jacob Stone stood in the doorway, travel-worn and exhausted, his clothes dusty from hard riding. Behind him stood another man, carrying surveying equipment and an official-looking case. Your Honor, Jacob said, his voice rough but clear, I have evidence that Mr. Brennan's survey is fraudulent, and I have a witness willing to testify to attempted bribery and marker manipulation. The room erupted. Emma jumped up, crying, Papa Jacob! Brennan's face went purple with rage. Aldrich sputtered objections. Sarah just stared, afraid to believe what she was seeing. Afraid to hope. Jacob crossed to Sarah, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that said everything he couldn't speak aloud in this moment. I came back. I'm here. I'm sorry I was almost too late. He set papers on the table in front of Harrison. Your Honor, this is a new survey of the Mitchell property, conducted by Samuel Hartley of Helena, a licensed territorial surveyor with 20 years' experience. His findings directly contradict Mr. Brennan's survey. The boundary markers on the Mitchell property show evidence of recent disturbance. Someone moved them to make it appear the spring was outside Mrs. Mitchell's boundaries. "That's absurd," Brennan shouted, standing up. "You can't just walk in here with some bought and paid for survey and—" "I didn't buy anything," Jacob said coldly, turning to face Brennan. "I paid Mr. Hartley standard rates for an honest survey. Can you say the same about your surveyor?" The man Jacob had brought with him stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'm Samuel Hartley. I conducted this survey 3 days ago at Mr. Stone's request. I found clear evidence that boundary markers had been tampered with specifically. They'd been moved approximately 40 feet east, which would place the spring outside Mrs. Mitchell's property line. When I repositioned the markers to their original survey locations using the original deed coordinates, the spring falls well within the Mitchell property boundaries." Harrison studied the new survey carefully, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Hartley, you're willing to testify to this under oath?" "I am, Your Honor. I've documented everything with photographs and detailed measurements. The original survey was accurate. Someone deliberately moved the markers to create a false claim." All eyes turned to Brennan, whose face had gone from purple to pale. Aldrich was frantically whispering to him, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Furthermore, Jacob continued, pulling out another document. "I'm prepared to testify that Mr. Brennan approached me 3 weeks ago in Montana, attempting to bribe me to stay away from this hearing. He offered me $5,000 to keep me from returning to Clearwater and supporting Mrs. Mitchell's defense." Asterisk, that's a lie. Brennan exploded. "Is it?" Jacob pulled out a telegram. "Because I have this telegram you sent to Helena, offering payment if I delayed my return. You had someone watching me, tracking my movements, trying to make sure I didn't get back in time for this hearing." Harrison's expression had gone from interested to dangerous. "Mr. Brennan, these are serious allegations. Fraud, bribery, witness tampering. I suggest you think very carefully about your next words." Brennan looked trapped, his eyes darting between Jacob, the judge, and his lawyer. Aldrich had gone quiet, clearly calculating whether to salvage his client or distance himself. "Your Honor," Jacob said, his voice steady and clear, "I'm also prepared to provide financial backing for Mrs. Mitchell. I've recently settled an estate in Montana and have substantial resources. I'm willing to invest in the Mitchell farm to ensure it has proper legal representation and to see that justice is done. Mrs. Mitchell isn't alone in this fight. She has a partner now." Sarah's breath caught. He'd said it in front of everyone, called himself her partner, claimed his place beside her, made his commitment public and legally significant. Jacob turned to her, and she saw everything in his eyes: exhaustion from the hard ride, fear that he might be too late, determination to make this right, and love. So much love it took her breath away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "just for her. I came as fast as I could. I promised I'd come back, and I meant it." Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't process the flood of emotions: relief, joy, anger that he'd cut it so close, overwhelming gratitude that he'd made it at all. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Harrison cleared his throat. "Mr. Brennan, I'm giving you one opportunity to withdraw your claim voluntarily before I make my ruling. The evidence suggests fraud, and if I rule against you, I'll be recommending criminal charges to the territorial attorney." Brennan's face twisted with rage and defeat. For a moment, Sarah thought he might do something reckless. But Aldrich put a hand on his arm, whispered urgently. Finally, Brennan stood. "I withdraw the claim," he bit out. "But this isn't over, Mitchell. You might have won today, but it is over," Jacob interrupted, his voice hard. "You'll leave Mrs. Mitchell alone. You'll stop circling this farm like a vulture. And if you don't, I have enough money now to make your life very difficult. I can match you liar for liar, surveyor for surveyor, legal challenge for legal challenge. And unlike you, I'm willing to be patient. So ask yourself, is Sarah Mitchell's farm really worth that fight? The room was silent. Brennan looked at Jacob, really looked at him, and saw something that made him step back. Saw that this wasn't the drifter who'd shown up months ago. This was a man who'd come into resources and determination, who'd traveled hundreds of miles to keep a promise, who wouldn't be intimidated or bought off. Fine, Brennan spat. Keep your pathetic little farm. It's not worth the trouble. He stormed out, Aldrich hurrying after him. The door slammed, and the tension in the room broke like a fever. Harrison smiled, the first real warmth he'd shown. Well, Mrs. Mitchell, it appears your water rights are secure. The challenge is dismissed. The original survey stands. And I'll be filing a report about suspicious marker tampering with the Territorial Land Office. He looked at Jacob. Mr. Stone, I don't know what Mrs. Mitchell did to deserve someone willing to ride hell for leather from Montana to make a court date. But I'd say she chose well. I'm the one who got lucky, Jacob said quietly. Still looking at Sarah, Emma couldn't contain herself any longer. She launched herself at Jacob, and he caught her, lifting her up despite his exhaustion. You came back. I knew you would. I kept them safe, Papa Jacob, just like you asked. She pulled the wooden horse and bird from her pocket, pressed them into his hands. Jacob looked down at the carvings, past and future, grief and hope, and felt something settle in his chest. Thank you, Emma, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I told you I'd come back for these. For you, for your mama. I keep my promises. Sarah stood on shaking legs, barely able to believe it was over. The hearing, the threat, the uncertainty. Jacob set Emma down gently and turned to Sarah, and the look on his face was everything she'd been afraid to hope for. I sold the ranch, he said. Everything. Converted it all to money. $50,000, Sarah. That's what Daniel left me, what we built together. And I want to invest it here. In this farm. In our future. If you'll have me. If you still want me. Sarah pulled the silver ring from her pocket, where she'd carried it like a talisman through the hearing. She held it out to him, her hand shaking. You came back, she said, her voice breaking. You promised and you came back. I'll always come back, Jacob said, taking the ring but not putting it away. Instead, he took her left hand, held it gently. Sarah Mitchell, I love you. I love Emma. I love this farm and this life and the future we can build together. I'm asking you, not just to let me invest money, but to let me invest my life. My whole life from now on. Will you marry me? The room was silent, everyone holding their breath. Sarah looked at this man, this giant, gentle, broken, healed man who'd ridden through the night to keep a promise, who'd faced his past to build a future, who'd chosen them over safety and ease and a successful ranch in Montana. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, yes, Jacob Stone, I'll marry you. I love you too. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all along to come home. Then he kissed her, right there in the hearing room with half the town watching, and Sarah kissed him back, pouring 3 years of loneliness and fear and careful hope into it. Emma cheered. The townspeople applauded. Judge Harrison cleared his throat and said something about filing proper paperwork. But for Sarah and Jacob, the world narrowed to just the two of them and the promise of everything that came next. 3 months had passed since the wedding, and the Mitchell farm, though everyone still called it that, out of habit and respect, barely resembled the struggling operation it had been. The new barn stood straight and true, its red paint bright against the winter landscape. The irrigation system Jacob had installed promised easier farming come spring. The livestock had nearly doubled with careful purchases of quality breeding stock. But more than the physical improvements, The farm felt different. It felt alive. It felt like home. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, watching Jacob and Emma build a snowman in the front yard. Emma was directing the operation with the seriousness of a general commanding troops, and Jacob was following her instructions with exaggerated obedience that made Emma giggle. The sound of her daughter's laughter carried through the cold air, pure and joyful. Sarah's hand went unconsciously to her stomach, to the small swell that wasn't quite visible yet under her dress. She and Jacob had told Emma last week, and the child's reaction had been everything they'd hoped, pure delight. Immediate plans for being the best big sister, questions about names and when the baby would arrive and whether it would like her carved bird. The baby, their baby. Hers and Jacob's wasn't due until summer, but already Sarah felt the difference it made. This physical proof that life was moving forward, that new chapters were being written while honoring the old ones. She turned from the window, her gaze falling on the mantel where a new family photograph sat in a place of honor. The photographer had come through town 2 weeks ago, and Sarah had insisted they have a formal portrait made. In it, she sat with Jacob standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder. Emma stood between them, beaming at the camera, the wooden horse and bird visible on a small table beside her. But that wasn't the only photograph. Beside it sat the tin photograph of Anna and Lily that Jacob had carried for 5 years. And on the other side, the portrait of Sarah and Thomas from their wedding day, young and hopeful and unaware of how short their time together would be. 3 photographs. 3 love stories, all part of one family's history. Sarah had been the one to arrange them that way, wanting to make clear that the past and present could coexist, that loving again didn't mean forgetting. Jacob had cried when he saw it, not sad tears, but healing ones. The kind that come when a wound you thought would never close finally begins to mend. The door burst open, bringing a blast of cold air and Emma's excited voice. "Mama, come see. We made the snowman look like Papa Jacob. It's huge." Sarah bundled into her coat and followed Emma outside. The snowman was indeed enormous, towering a good 7 feet tall, with a hat that Jacob had contributed and a carrot nose that sat at a slightly crooked angle. "It's perfect," Sarah declared, earning a satisfied nod from Emma. "We should make another one," Emma suggested. "A mama snowman to keep him company, and a little one for me. Then we'll have a whole snow family." "After lunch," Jacob said, ruffling Emma's hair. "Your mama's been cooking, and I'm starving." They trooped inside, stomping snow from boots, hanging wet coats by the fire. The kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of stew and fresh bread. As they settled around the table, the same table where Sarah had once worried over thin budgets and impossible choices, Sarah felt overwhelmed by the ordinary beauty of it all. This was what she'd been fighting for, not just survival, but life. Not just endurance, but joy. This moment, with flour on her hands and her daughter chattering about snowmen and her husband stealing a kiss when Emma wasn't looking. This was everything. After lunch, while Emma napped, she still needed afternoon rests. Though she protested being a big girl now, Sarah and Jacob sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching the snow fall. "I've been thinking," Jacob said, "about spring, about expansion. The adjacent 40 acres is coming available. Old Henderson died last month, and his daughter wants to sell. With our resources, we could buy it outright. Give Emma even more to inherit eventually. And give our new little one something too," Sarah added, placing her hand on her stomach. "I still can't quite believe it. Another baby. Another chance," Jacob said quietly. "To be a father, to do it right this time, to be present for every moment." "You were a good father to Lily," Sarah reminded him gently. "You are a good father to Emma. You'll be a good father to this baby. You don't have to prove anything, Jacob." "I know," he said, "but it still feels like a gift I don't quite deserve. After everything I did, the running, The abandoning Daniel. The 5 years wasted. Not wasted, Sarah interrupted. That journey brought you here. To us. And Jacob, we all have things we regret. Things we wish we'd done differently. But we're here now. That's what matters. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the landscape into something clean and new. In the distance, smoke rose from chimneys in town. Somewhere, Pastor Williams was probably preparing his Sunday sermon. The Hendersons were minding their store. Tom Weaver was tending his livestock. Life continued, ordinary and precious. Do you ever think about what Emma started? Sarah asked. That day she asked you to be her papa at my birthday dinner? How brave she was. I think about it all the time, Jacob admitted. That little girl asking a complete stranger to love her mother, to be part of their family. I could have said no. Should have said no, probably. But something in her eyes, hope, Sarah supplied. She had hope when we both given up on it. And she was right. She saw something we couldn't see yet. Smart kid, Jacob said with a smile. She gets it from her father, Sarah said. It meant both of them, Thomas, who'd given Emma life, and Jacob, who was giving her a future. The afternoon passed in peaceful domesticity. Emma woke and insisted on building the mama and baby snowmen to complete the Snow family. Sarah made hot chocolate. Jacob told stories about growing up in Ohio, before Montana, before Anna and Lily. Stories Sarah had never heard before. He was opening up more now, letting her see all of him, not just the broken parts he'd arrived with, but the whole person he was becoming. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Sarah and Jacob lay in bed in the room that had been hers alone for 3 years and was now theirs together. Jacob's arm was around her, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady and sure and here. Sarah? Jacob said into the darkness. Do you ever regret it? Taking me in? Letting me stay? Never, Sarah said without hesitation. Not even once. Do you regret coming back from Montana? I regret not coming back sooner, Jacob said. Not being here for the hearing from the start. Letting you worry. Letting Emma doubt. But regret staying? Never. This is where I'm meant to be. Sarah shifted to look at him in the dim light from the banked fire. We're going to be happy, aren't we? Really happy. Not just surviving or managing, but actually happy. We already are, Jacob said. But yes, we're going to keep being happy. We're going to raise Emma and this new baby. We're going to expand the farm. We're going to grow old together, watching our children have children. We're going to build something that lasts. Promise? Sarah asked, and the word held all the echoes of Emma asking the same thing months ago. Promise, Jacob said solemnly. Really, truly, actually promise. Sarah kissed him then, slow and sweet and full of love that had been earned through fear overcome and trust built one day at a time. When they finally broke apart, she settled back against his chest, his hand resting protectively over where their baby was growing. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the farm in white, making everything new. The Snowman family stood guard in the yard, Papa, Mama, and Emma, with room for more to be added come morning. On the mantel inside, 3 photographs watched. Over the sleeping house, past, present, and future, all honored, all cherished, all part of the story. Emma's blue ribbon, the one she'd worn that first day when she asked Jacob to be her papa, hung now on the wall beside her bed, a reminder of courage and hope and the day everything changed. Beside it hung a new ribbon, pink this time, waiting for the baby sister or brother who would arrive in summer. In the barn, Thomas's work gloves still hung on their nail, but they weren't alone anymore. Jacob's gloves hung beside them, along with new tools and equipment, signs of active use and ongoing work. The barn wasn't a shrine to what was lost, but a living space for what was being built. And in the house, in the room they now shared, Sarah and Jacob Stone slept peacefully, wrapped around each other, secure in the knowledge that they'd found what they'd both been seeking without knowing to seek it a home, a family, a future worth fighting for and living into with full hearts. Sometimes the bravest thing a child can do is ask a stranger to love them. Sometimes the hardest thing a broken man can do is say yes. And sometimes, if everyone is very brave and very lucky, that yes becomes a lifetime of yeses to love, to hope, to staying even when it's hard, to building something beautiful from broken pieces. Emma had asked for a papa at one birthday dinner. What she'd gotten, what they'd all gotten, was so much more. She'd gotten a complete family. Sarah had gotten a partner and a second chance at love. Jacob had gotten a reason to stop running and start living. And in the spring, when the baby came, they'd all get another gift proof that love multiplies rather than divides, that hearts expand to make room for everyone who matters, that the best families are built not just on blood, but on choice and commitment and the daily decision to show up for each other. The snow fell through the night, clean and soft and promising. And in the morning, they'd all wake up together, Sarah and Jacob and Emma, and the baby they didn't know yet but already loved, and they'd build more snowmen or repair fences or plan for spring planning or just sit together by the fire and be grateful, because that's what families do. They choose each other every day. They weather storms together. They celebrate small joys. They honor the past while building the future. They keep their promises, especially the really, truly, actually important ones. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between the ordinary tasks of living, they pause and remember how it all started with a little girl's brave question and a broken man's willingness to say yes. And they're grateful for that courage, that risk, that leap of faith that changed everything. Love makes you brave, Emma had said once, and she was right. Love made Sarah brave enough to trust again. Love made Jacob brave enough to stay. Love made Emma brave enough to ask in the first place, and love made them all brave enough to believe that happily ever after wasn't just for fairy tales. Sometimes, if you fought for it and chose it and protected it every single day, you could have it in real life too. In a small farmhouse in Wyoming, with snow falling outside and a family sleeping peacefully inside. That's exactly what was happening. Not a fairy tale, but something better, a real life. Chosen and built and cherished, imperfect and beautiful and worth every moment of courage it took to create it. The wooden horse and the carved bird sat side by side on the mantel, witnesses to it all, Lily's memory honored, Emma's present celebrated, the future promised and protected. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the snow-covered farm, they'd all wake up together and start another day of that built together as a family. Really, truly, actually, now and always.